Chapter 152. June 14th. The storm was still raging in every corner of Dongdu. The rain columns connecting the sky and the earth were flying all over the sky, roaring in the violent wind. The entire Dongdu in the storm gave people a dangerous feeling of lingering on death's door. It seemed to be affected by the weather. The atmosphere inside the whole East Island seemed to become gloomy and depressing in the storm. The storm hit Dongdu. But the real storm had swept the whole East Island within dozens of hours. Chaos came as expected. Like an ignited explosive as the fuse burned to the end, the calm situation suddenly broke out in a nearly overturned state. Countless flames rose to the sky, blood and flesh flew everywhere. In a very short time, the whole East Island seemed to be filled with a violent and messy beauty. 6:40 in the morning. Ninghu. The director of the intelligence department of Yamaguchi-gumi disappeared on his way to the headquarters. 7:15 in the morning. Dongdu. Senior Counselor Kyakuwa-do also walked out of his house and got into his own car. The car didn't even travel 200 meters before it exploded violently. The surging flames completely engulfed everything around it. The driver, the bodyguards, and even Kyakuwa-do himself were all turned into a pile of charcoal in the violent explosion. 7:30 in the morning. Dongdu. In less than a day after the chaos subsided, several mysterious superiors led a team to raid Takeshita Street. Countless special warfare agencies suffered heavy losses before they could react. Several leaders of special warfare agencies were killed. The scene was horrible. 8 o'clock in the morning. Fiong Peak, the holy mountain. The divine wind force finally responded. The first group of 50 elites just went down the mountain. They were ambushed before they even walked out of the foot of the mountain. The 50 elites of the divine wind force were all wiped out. Their vehicles rolled down the mountain. It looked like a traffic accident. The storm was still heavy. From 8 o'clock in the morning to 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the whole East Island, Dongdu, Ninghu, Chongdao, Xiantai, Minggu, Jubin, Bingang, Jingzhong, Futai, in countless areas, all kinds of accidents and attacks appeared one after another. People from all walks of life died or disappeared because of all kinds of accidents. In less than a day, the whole East Island fell into a chaotic situation that had never been seen in decades. Blood was everywhere. Dead people were everywhere. This kind of continuous assassination and attack seemed to have no sign of stopping. As time went by, this series of bloody assassinations was bound to continue. On this day it did not feel like the collision of the Dark World at all, but the prelude to a world war. A large number of assassinations involved various domains, including the royal family, the political circle, the military, business and finance, the underworld, the special warfare system, various consortiums and various shrines. A large number of assassins hidden in the dark seemed to have no specific target at all. In other words, anyone who was influential in a certain field could be said to be their target. All aspects of East Island took action. The police, the military, the special warfare system, and the underworld forces all responded immediately. After a lot of bloody assassinations, the whole East Island seemed to be moving toward a more chaotic direction. The day. Dong Island. On the third day after all the elites of Zhongzhou State sneaked into East Island safely, the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State finally showed its sharpest and coldest fangs on the land of this neighboring country. The vehicles from the royal family and the cabinet once again headed straight for Furong Peak. The two top aides, Song Xia-ing and Zhuha Hengxin, who represented the will of the Mikado and the Prime Minister respectively, went straight to the Divine Wind Force to meet the only superior of the invincible realm in East Island, Supreme Ninja Shinichi Miyamoto. At the same time in the Azure Pool Hot Spring Club, an internal meeting was also being held. It's not big enough. In the conference room, Tribulation, dressed in black, sat in the main seat. His first sentence shocked everyone. Not all the people in the conference room were in the conference room. Many of them were still outside and hadn't come back yet. But obviously Tribulation didn't want to wait any longer. He looked at the list in his hand and frowned slightly. After a few seconds of silence he said in a low and hoarse voice, "Who can tell me what's going on?" What Tribulation held in his hand was an extremely long list. The densely packed names were arranged on the A4 paper in his hand, and there were even more than one page. At a rough glance there were at least hundreds of people on the list. However, many of the names had been crossed out, which was the mark of death. But compared with this part of the people, there were obviously more people who had not been crossed out. Tribulation frowned and looked at it for a while. Then he threw the list on the table in front of him and said lightly, "Everyone, is that all we can do? It's a little strange." Yi Fengqing sat next to Tribulation looking a little distressed. He rubbed his forehead as if he didn't know how to express himself. These people are collected by Director Han over the years. Can be said to be a very important list. In theory, if we kill all these people, East Island will be in chaos for a while. But now the situation is that we have the list and the information, but many people can't be found. He took the list on the table and sighed. Here, these are the people. So strange. There are a lot of people here, especially some masters of the special warfare system. After we rushed over, we couldn't see them at all. At most, we killed a few small fries. It was useless to torture them because even those people didn't know where the target went. I really doubt whether they are masters or cowards. As for the others, there are a lot of guts, such as the vice president of the bank, and the chairman of the board of directors. They can be found easily, but some masters have disappeared inexplicably. As Yi Fengqing spoke, he lit a cigarette. After looking around, he said helplessly, "Is there anyone who has encountered the same thing as me?" Tribulation raised his eyebrows and glanced at the others. There weren't many people sitting at this conference table now. To be exact, there were only 4, including Tribulation. As the strongest master that Zhou State put in East Island, Tribulation didn't participate in the series of assassinations outside. His eyes were fixed on Fu Peak all the time. The other 3 people, Yi Fengqing, Flaming Fire, and Gu Yunxia, were not idle. Bai Yuming, Horsewoman, and the Enchantress hadn't come back yet. Everyone was on the move. After Yi Fengqing went out once, the situation he encountered was a little strange. Tribulation looked at Flaming Fire and Gu Yunxia and asked, "What about you?" "Almost the same." Gu Yunxia frowned and said in a low voice. Among the first group of elites from Zhou State who sneaked into East Island, Gu Yunxia could be said to be the representative. Although she and Tribulation had a sharp stand, she could still distinguish the basic situation outside Zhou State. "I also went to a few places. Some of them were fruitful, but some of them were empty, especially the masters of the special warfare system. No one was in their bases or at home. It seemed that they had been away for a while. As for some people in other fields, they also have a wide range of activities, so it's normal that they can't be found. But how could the masters of the special warfare system disappear inexplicably?" Several people at the table narrowed their eyes almost at the same time. "I'm from East Island, so I'm more familiar with this place than you guys. What I encountered was similar. I often couldn't find anyone, and I also went to a few places where they were most likely to go, but they were also empty. It's said that some of them haven't been here for a while." Flaming Fire took a deep breath and looked serious. The helpless expression on Yi Fengqing's face suddenly became serious. Today was the first day of action and he missed a few targets. He thought it was his bad luck, but this kind of situation happened to everyone. Obviously there was an inside story. And these were all masters of the special warfare system. If they suddenly disappeared, where could they go? And where could they go? Have they left East Island? Yi Fengqing took a big drag on his cigarette and said suddenly. Flaming Fire was stunned and said subconsciously, "If they're not in East Island, where can they go?" The conference room suddenly became quiet. Several people looked at each other and thought of a possibility at the same time. "Those lunatics from Zhou State are crazy. Their actions are too big. Do they want to start a world war? Your Highness Miyamoto, now only you can punish them. We think it's time to send out all the Divine Wind Force to maintain the stability of the special warfare system of East Island." At the same time, in the headquarters of the Divine Wind Force. In the conference room, the top advisor of the royal family, Zhou Xian, paced back and forth and shouted excitedly. When Zhou Xian, who had always been calm and gentle, almost completely lost his composure, Swaha Hengshin sat aside in silence. He just looked at Shinichi Miyamoto, who sat opposite him, without saying a word. In less than a day, nearly 200 people were assassinated. And it wasn't just 200 people who were insignificant. Every one of the victims had a sensitive identity, more or less. It was easy to imagine how chaotic East Island was. East Island had always been one of the countries with the strongest special warfare system. It was the first time in decades that such a chaotic situation had happened. It was a great shame. The Divine Wind Force was the power center of the special warfare system of East Island. If they didn't take action now, when would they? At present, we can basically confirm it. Feeling Song Xiaoying's excitement, Shinichi Miyamoto, whose face was still covered by a black scarf, said in a calm tone, "Now a large number of elites of Zhongzhou State have sneaked into East Island. What happened today can be said to be Zhongzhou State's provocation to East Island." "Your Highness Miyamoto." Zhou Xian suddenly opened his mouth. His tone was still respectful, but there was a hint of toughness in it. "In fact, we don't want to listen to any analysis. What the royal family and the cabinet need most is how to solve the current situation. East Island must be stable and all the enemies must be eliminated." "Of course." Shinichi Miyamoto's eyes flashed inexplicably. He said blandly, "In fact, compared to the Mikado and the Prime Minister, I'm more anxious. But I have to stay rational." He stood up from his seat, and his powerful momentum instantly filled the whole conference room. "So far, Zhongzhou State has a big plan. It seems that they not only want the power of Night Spirit in East Island, but also want to severely damage the special warfare system of East Island. No, they have already started to do that. Strength and appetite are relative. Since Zhongzhou State dares to do this, it means that they will put a lot of power into East Island this time. And to be honest, I'm in a dilemma now." Zhou Xian and Song Xiaoying fell silent at the same time. Dilemma. Of course they knew why Shinichi Miyamoto was in a dilemma. What happened today was the most chaotic situation in East Island in recent decades. But at the same time, the special warfare system of East Island was also the weakest in recent decades. They were not weak. But too much power was not in East Island at all. Instead, they had sneaked into Zhongzhou State. "They are in Zhongzhou State?" After a short silence, Yi Fengqing finally spoke. His tone was not shock or fear but incredulity. "So many people. Are they not in East Island but all in Zhongzhou State? Are the Japanese tired of living? Craziness and perverseness are in the genes of East Islanders. The battle between Castellan and Samsara tomorrow will attract a lot of attention. I think not only East Island but other forces will also send a lot of elites into Zhongzhou State. If it's a life and death battle tomorrow, after the battle, these foreign forces may take the opportunity to deal a fatal blow to the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State. For those who don't know the inside story, they will definitely bet on such a good opportunity." Gu Yunxiao glanced at flaming fire beside her and then said with a poker face, "This is really..." Yi Fengqing's smile was very complicated with excitement, joy and a trace of disbelief. Everyone knew that East Island would definitely send people to Zhongzhou State. But Yi Fengqing did not expect that there would be so many people. The masters of the special warfare system on the list alone were a very strong force. Together with Tianhai Wuji and Luxing Songquan, two superiors of the invincible realm in Zhongzhou State, it could be said that East Island put more than half of its elites in Zhongzhou State this time. How crazy was this decision? It was simply the courage of a moron. But if he thought about it carefully, the reason why East Island dared to bet might be that the resentment between Samsara and Kunlun City was real. If the battle tomorrow was really a lose-lose situation, it was really hard to say how much effect East Island's force would play. And it could be foreseen that not only East Island, but also the Jiang family, Knights Templars and Fantasy World would also send elites into Zhongzhou State. If these forces were added together, it would be really terrible. Zhongzhou State must be a gathering of storms now. But tomorrow's battle was destined to have no big loss, so Yi Fengqing had nothing to worry about. In that case, our trip to East Island can be more relaxed. Yi Fengqing smiled and said softly, "Don't be careless." Tribulation glanced at Yi Fengqing and shook his head. After all, this is East Island. Integrate the resources of East Island? In the Divine Wind Force, Zhou Xian looked at Shinichi Miyamoto in front of him in disbelief. "It's the only way." Shinichi Miyamoto's tone was cold and firm. "This is our home field, but now it's hard for me to be sure that we have the upper hand. God knows how many people Zhongzhou State has invested in East Island. Ziditsang Guqianchuan. These are all uncertain factors. We have a lot of superiors of the Thundershocking realm who have sneaked into Zhongzhou State. Now facing the power of Zhongzhou State, do we have to rely on the elites of the Divine Wind Force to fight? I need superiors. Zhongzhou State is only a few hours away from East Island. Maybe we can call back some of the superiors of Zhongzhou State," Song Xiaoying said hesitantly. Before he finished, he smiled bitterly. "Call back." Shinichi Miyamoto nodded. "That's a good idea. But can they come back now? He turned around and looked at the snow on Fu Peak through the glass of the conference room. He said expressionlessly, if the final battle between the master of Samsara Palace and the god of war of Zhongzhou State is a trap, then all of us in Zhongzhou State may become the bargaining chips in the hands of the opponent. They may come back but not now. Zhou Xian sighed deeply and suddenly felt powerless. When the news of the final battle in Zhongzhou State first spread, how many people thought it was fake? It was about the ranking on the divine list and the rise and growth of the Samsara Palace. It was about the political situation of Zhongzhou State and the overall situation of the Dark World. Plus, Qin Weibai's man was Li Tianlan. All kinds of reasons seemed to prove the authenticity and seriousness of this battle. The scheme set up by Samsara Palace and Zhongzhou State might not be flawless, but everyone saw a beautiful future. The huge benefits made them instinctively ignore the possible risks. But now that they thought about it, the master of Samsara Palace destroyed Night's spirit, and what she was after was definitely more than a murderous weapon. It seemed wiser to join forces with Zhongzhou State to plot against East Island. But they ignored this at that time. This mistake was so serious that it directly pushed the whole East Island into an extremely embarrassing situation. Now it was useless to inform Tianhai Wuji and Luxing Songquan. It was better to let them calm down and watch the battle before considering other things. Integrate the resources of all systems and concentrate our strength to fight against the enemy. At least we can't give the enemy a chance to break us one by one. At the same time, I propose again that we completely wake up the Kusanagi force and take out all the forces we can use. In this situation we have no time. Shinichi Miyamoto's tone became more and more indifferent. No time? Zhou Xian asked subconsciously and then said with a wry smile, as far as I know, even if the Mikado and Mr. Prime Minister agree to integrate the resources, it will take more than 1 or 2 days. Special cases, special cases. Shinichi Miyamoto shook his head. We don't have to integrate all the resources. As long as our strength can destroy the enemy, that's enough. After all, this is East Island. Please tell the Prime Minister and the Mikado that this is a war of the Dark World, but not only a war of the Dark World. At the critical moment, I need their full support. Zhou Xian and Zhou Hengxin straightened up at the same time and bowed deeply. Yes. Shinichi Miyamoto took a deep breath and suddenly said, how about the Kusanagi force of the Black Sun Institute? 2 soldiers are damaged more than 35%. They can join the battle after repair. It will take about a week. Zhou Xian said slowly, Your Highness Miyamoto, the Mikado agreed to wake up all the Kusanagi force in principle. I think the royal family will give a clear attitude when I go back. Shinichi Miyamoto nodded, narrowed his eyes and said thoughtfully, Shitian Financial Group? Shitian Ingji has released a statement, saying that he and Shitian Mingzi are no longer father and daughter and expelled her from Shitian Financial Group. At present, Shitian Mingzi has become a traitor, and the royal family has sent an elite team to rescue Dr. Watanabe. Zhou Xiaoying's tone was flat, but when he mentioned Shitian Financial Group, there was a trace of coldness and killing intent in his tone. Shinichi Miyamoto nodded and said with a smile, Dr. Watanabe will be fine. The royal rescue team doesn't need to follow too closely. If everything goes well, they will all appear here. He reached out his hand and pointed at the map of East Island on the conference table, his eyes deep. This is... The 2 aides representing the royal family and the office of the Prime Minister looked over subconsciously, their eyes confused. The place of the final battle. Shinichi Miyamoto said calmly. Bang! In the serious and depressing discussion, the door of the conference room was suddenly pushed open. Han Shishuan, who had hidden in East Island for many years and controlled all the intelligence, hurried in. His expression was calm, but his eyes showed a sense of exasperation and anxiety. Everyone's heart suddenly sank. What's wrong? Tribulation's eyes instantly focused and he said in a deep voice. Something happened. Han Shishuan's calm face became a little pale. At present it can be confirmed that Wang Xingxiao, Li Tianlan and Gu Hanshan are all in danger. The 3 of them have all lost contact. Before he finished speaking, everyone's expression changed dramatically. Almost all the experts present had taken action, so the work of contacting Wang Xingxiao, Li Tianlan, and the others was handed over to Han Shishuan's people. No one expected that in less than 2 days, the 3 young heavenly sons, who were likely to represent the strongest combat force in Zhongzhou State in the future, had all lost contact. What the hell happened? Tribulation subconsciously clenched his fists, but his tone became calmer. It's not clear now. I'm asking people to collect intelligence. The only news I got now is that Tianlong is very likely to encounter the Kusanagi force in Sensoji. As for Wang Xingxiao and Gu Hanshan, there's no news for the time being. Han Shixuan's tone was heavy, and his heart was almost twisted. He knew very well what these three young people meant to the future of Zhongzhou state. Something happened to these three people. Han Shixuan's mouth twitched and he didn't dare to continue thinking for a moment. Kusanagi force. Tribulation, Yi Fengqing, Gu Yunxiao and Flaming Fire stood up at the same time. How could the Kusanagi force appear in the Black Sun Institute? It's our fault. We didn't collect enough intelligence. We didn't expect that such a precious superforce would appear in the Black Sun Institute. We underestimated the importance of the Black Sun Institute before, so the accident happened. Damn it. The more Han Shixuan said, the angrier he became. At last he couldn't help cursing. Swish. Before he finished speaking, Flaming Fire's body had directly rushed out of the conference room with lightning. The Kusanagi force. Given the status of these people present, they were no strangers to the name of the Kusanagi force. What they lacked was their understanding of the Kusanagi force. This superforce, which combined biotechnology and high-tech, was definitely more difficult to deal with than most experts. It was a real killing machine. Li Tianlong should have encountered the Kusanagi force. For a moment, the whole conference room fell into a dead silence. What about Wang Xingxiao and Gu Hanshan? Yi Fengqing was silent for a while and suddenly asked. Han Shixuan shook his head and said with a gloomy expression, "We're still investigating. There's no news for the time being." The look in Yi Fengqing's eyes changed and he subconsciously glanced at Tribulation. Gu Yunxiao wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Tribulation stood in front of the conference table and was silent for a full 5 minutes. Then he said in a low voice, "Let all our people take action and find a way to find them. After getting in touch with them we can confirm their status. If you want to find them you can leave Dongdu. Find them first." Leave Dongdu. Yi Fengqing frowned and muttered to himself. No one knew what he was thinking. This should also be the plan of the East Island government. Obviously, they already know of our existence and have taken the three young heavenly sons as a breakthrough point. They intend to use them as bargaining chips to force us to leave Dongdu. Han Shixuan said quickly, "It seems that East Island has reacted, and they have even begun to choose the place of the final battle." The place of the final battle? Zhou Xian looked at the map with a strange look in his eyes, looking at Shinichi Miyamoto's indifferent eyes. Why here? Anywhere is fine. As long as it's not Dongdu. Shinichi Miyamoto shook his head. At present it seems that this is the most suitable place. Shitian Mingzi defected to Li Tianlong. She brought Dr. Watanabe, so she must meet with Li Tianlong. Li Tianlong, Wang Xingxiao and Gu Hanshan were the three strongest young heavenly sons in Zhongzhou state. They all had huge forces behind them. As long as they were forced here, all the forces of Zhongzhou state would also gather here. They couldn't give up these three people, absolutely not. So we only need to use a small amount of forces to track their whereabouts and put all the integrated forces into the final battle. The right time, right place and right people are on our side and we will be the final winner. In this case, Song Xiaoying pondered and said respectfully, "Please forgive me for being presumptuous. Your Highness, if this is really so simple, why don't you do it yourself? As long as you personally..." He paused before he could finish his sentence. Because Shinichi Miyamoto shook his head with extreme irritation and said in a cold tone, "I can't go down the mountain now." The two aides were stunned at the same time. "Someone is targeting me," Shinichi Miyamoto said, "although I don't know who it is, I'm sure that someone is targeting me now. It's very dangerous. If I act rashly I may die." "Probably so." Tribulation looked at Han Shixuan and nodded. Then he said, "So we must find them as soon as possible and even bring them back. I don't mind fighting with East Island, but the battlefield and the initiative of the war must be in our hands. If we let them arrange it we will be too passive. It will be very dangerous for us no matter the time or the situation." He paused for a second and continued, "So, everyone bring them back before East Island catches them completely." Yi Fengqing looked at Tribulation who was standing straight and suddenly said with a strange look in his eyes, You're not going? I can't go. Tribulation shook his head. I have to keep an eye on a person. If he doesn't move, I can't move. He paused for a while and continued. If the battlefield is finally determined, I will probably set off with him, or find a chance to kill him in advance. Chapter 153. As the former capital of East Island, compared with other big cities in East Island, Zhongjing, which was located inland, was undoubtedly the most inconspicuous one. It might not be accurate to say that it was inconspicuous, but compared to cities such as Dongdu, Ninghu, Jubin and Bingang, Chukyo did look a little less dazzling. In the ancient atmosphere and city, everything in Chukyo looked normal with no shortcomings but also no advantages. When ordinary people mentioned Zhongjing, words like ancient, heritage and history were inseparable from Zhongjing. But Zhongjing in the Dark World only had one word: safety. In the whole East Island, Zhongjing was one of the safest cities, even second to Dongdu, which had the divine wind force. Wuji Palace, the biggest holy land of martial arts in the whole East Island, was located in Zhongjing. East Island was a country with a high crime rate, but since the establishment of Wuji Palace, Zhongjing had the fewest major cases in the whole country. Even Dongdu couldn't compare with it. In the past few years, countless masters and elites from the Dark World entered this city, but they were killed by Wuji Palace before they could take action. The Grand Master of the invincible realm of Wuji Palace directly turned the whole of Zhongjing into his own base camp in just a few years, and his foundation went deep into every street and alley of Zhongjing. It was no exaggeration to say that Wuji Palace could see every corner of Zhongjing as far as it could see. Tianhai Wuji, the master of Wuji sword sect, was the well-deserved guardian of the whole Zhongjing. But when this guardian, the sharpest saber in East Island, was gone, the sharpness of the whole Wuji Palace seemed to disappear. This seemed to be an inevitable phenomenon. In East Island, no one dared to deny the strength of Wuji Palace, but this strength was largely built on Tianhai Wuji alone, at least with him as the core. The newly rising Wuji Palace was strong, but its foundation was seriously insufficient, and it didn't form a complete inheritance and system. Most of the time, it was Tianhai Wuji alone who supported the appearance of absolute glory of Wuji Palace. When Tianhai Wuji was not in Zhongjing, Wuji Palace was still prosperous. But as the wind blew, Wuji Palace, which had lost its backbone, suddenly felt like it was about to collapse in the wind and rain. June 12. Although Limitless Palace's vice palace master wasn't very strong, he controlled most of Limitless Palace's businesses. Shi Menfeng died in his own office. His throat was slit. Including Shimon Feng's secretary, assistant, driver and bodyguard, a total of 12 people were all killed within 2 minutes. Up to the point of death, none of them had been able to send out a single message. 3 hours after Shi Menfeng's death, Limitless Palace received the news of the Vice Palace Master's death and immediately took action. Within 5 hours they locked onto the murderer in Zhongjing. Limitless Palace's 2 great protectors, White Bird and Black Dolphin, led the elites of Limitless Palace to attack at the same time, encircling and annihilating the murderer in Zhongjing West City. The fierce battle lasted for less than half an hour, and most of the street was almost turned into ruins. More than half of the 200 elites were killed or injured, and Protector Heiyu, who had entered the stabilization phase of the thunder-shocking realm, was killed on the spot. The murderer swaggered off. Furthermore, he escaped unscathed. June 13. Limitless Palace's law protector White Bird died during the pursuit. The killer disappeared. In less than 8 hours, Limitless Palace locked onto the whereabouts of the murderer again. The second superior of Limitless Palace, Left Advisor Heavenly Hound, took action in person, and nearly 300 elites assisted him. The entire Zhongjing seemed to fall into a chaotic battle rhythm with this encirclement and suppression. The two sides fought all the way from 33 halls to Zhongjing Tower, drawing an exaggerated battle line of dozens of kilometers in the entire downtown area. The murderer, who was alone before, gradually had reinforcements. The two sides chased and fled, and countless people died. They fought all the way from downtown Zhongjing to the mountain forest at the junction of Zhongjing and Jubin. The elites of Limitless Palace were all killed or wounded, and there were very few reinforcements around the murderer. But the pursuit, which was destined to be endless from the beginning, didn't stop at all, and it continued. June 15. In the early morning. It was already late at night. The bright moonlight shone on the forest and the whole world seemed to be quiet. Under a thick ancient tree, Gu Hanshan, the young master of Kunlun City, silently nibbled the bread in his hand, and calmly stared at the map of East Island in front of him, looking focused. Young master, after passing through this forest, we will enter Juban in about 30 kilometers. Should we find a chance to go back to Dongdu and gather with the main force? A middle-aged man stared at the darkness around vigilantly and asked in a low voice, with undisguised anxiety in his eyes. I'm afraid it's not that easy. Gu Hanshan shook his head. His face was pale and he looked seriously injured. After several days of continuous fighting, 2 superiors of the thunder-shocking realm died in his hands. Now Gu Hanshan, who was only at the peak of the fire-flaming realm, was brilliant in the battle. But in the end, Heavenly Hound, the left advisor of Limitless Palace, completely suppressed this young heavenly son of Zhou state. A superior of the half-step invincible realm wasn't someone Gu Hanshan could compete with. He nibbled the bread and said blandly, "Now our identities have been exposed and the entire East Island is in chaos. In any case, Limitless Palace won't let us go back to Dongdu and gather with the main force. There must be no way to go to Dongdu. Even if there is a way, it's probably a trap." The middle-aged man gritted his teeth and didn't say a word. After several days of continuous pursuit, their supplies had been used up, and all communication tools were completely broken. Now they were trapped in this mountain area and completely lost contact with the outside world. Behind them, there were superiors of the half-step invincible realm chasing after them. The future of these few people was really uncertain. In the depressing silence, several figures quickly and stealthily passed through the forest and came to the 2 of them. "Young Master Gu, the encirclement is getting tighter and tighter. Relatively speaking, the west is still a little loose for the time being. After all, Juban's reaction is a little slow. We can break through the encirclement from the west." West. Gu Hanshan glanced at these people and seemed to be thinking about something. These people were the elites of Zhou state who sneaked into East Island in advance, or members of the Snowdance Corps. These days they fought and retreated. Now less than 10% of the elite team of nearly 200 people were left, but their morale was still high. West. The elite of Zhou state who was responsible for investigating the surrounding terrain nodded. "Enter Juban, then go through Ninghu to Yama. We can reach Chongdao or Yamaguchi. In this way, aren't we getting farther and farther away from Dongdu?" The middle-aged man beside Gu Hanshan frowned slightly. "There's nothing we can do about it. In an away battle, we don't have the initiative. Now the situation is critical, we can only take it one step at a time." Gu Hanshan shook his head, stood up and said without hesitation, "Then break through to the west." "To the west? That's a good plan, but can you leave?" A cold voice abruptly rang out from the forest dozens of meters away. In the forest, the bright and sharp lightning flashed slightly, and a figure directly appeared in the darkness. Because of the distance, no one could see his appearance clearly. They could only vaguely see that he wore a moon-white robe. In their sight, the white robe seemed to flutter slightly. In a flash, the bodies of the 2 people at the outermost of Gu Hanshan directly burst into countless pieces of flesh and blood. The blood mist flew and scattered in the forest. The white robe had directly appeared in front of Gu Hanshan. Left advisor of Wuji Palace, Heavenly Hound. In the absence of Tianhai Wuji, the palace master of Wuji Palace, this superior of the half-step invincible realm could be said to be the real #1 superior of Wuji Palace. The surrounding air was slightly twisted. Gu Hanshan, who had been silent, suddenly took a step forward. With him as the center, countless rays of light appeared around him in an instant. It was the extremely condensed flame. The hot temperature condensed into a point and spread into a line. There seemed to be countless lasers bursting in the air at the same time, cutting everything. Heavenly Hound subconsciously took half a step back. At the same time, Gu Hanshan had pulled several Zhou state elites at the periphery behind him. "You go first." He stared at Heavenly Hound in front of him and ordered in a flat tone. "Young Master." "Young Master Gu." Behind Gu Hanshan, the faces of several surviving Zhou state elites changed at the same time. "Don't talk nonsense, go first. Take the brothers nearby who haven't come back." Gu Hanshan frowned. He said coldly, "This is an order. Go." The middle-aged man who belonged to Kunlun City gritted his teeth and was still hesitating. Several laser lines around Gu Hanshan suddenly turned. Under the hot temperature, a giant tree beside him was swept by a laser. The whole trunk of the tree collapsed instantly and the cut was smooth. The light was still rotating, sweeping towards several Zhongzhou state elites nearby without stopping. The middle-aged man's expression changed. He took a step back subconsciously and then without hesitation he turned around and left. Gu Hanshan stood where he was, motionless. This heavenly son of Zhongzhou state who was as famous as Wang Xingxiao, the heir of the Wang family of Beihai, looked ordinary. But at this moment, there was a kind of light and fighting desire that people couldn't look directly at him. You will die here. Heavenly Hound looked at Gu Hanshan seriously and said in a playful tone, you could have lived a little longer. Is it worth it for a few non-entities? This super expert who ranked first among the experts in the entire East Island, had been famous for nearly 20 years. But he was nearly 50 years old and wore a white robe. His face looked like that of a young man in his 30s, handsome and enchanting. Against the bright moonlight he vaguely looked like a jade tree in the wind. Looking at Gu Hanshan, whose fighting desire kept rising, he narrowed a pair of cold and charming peach blossom eyes and said in a bewitching tone, sacrifice them and you can live at least 2 more days. It's a good result, isn't it? The remaining Zhongzhou state elites behind him walked further and further away. Gu Hanshan stood still and said calmly, I can bleed for Zhongzhou state and I can ask others to bleed for Zhongzhou state, but I have no right to ask others to bleed for me. He spoke very slowly and Tengu did not seem to mind this deliberate method of delaying time. He responded with an "oh" and said thoughtfully, but your identity? My identity is a warrior. Gu Hanshan suddenly smiled. The corners of his mouth rose obviously, and his smile was firm and decisive. Even if one day I become the god of war of Zhongzhou state, I will still be the most powerful warrior in Zhongzhou state. There were more and more lasers condensed from flames around him, and they rotated faster and faster. The temperature of the whole forest became hotter. Heavenly Hound nodded. In this case, then you can die. Gu Hanshan finished what he didn't say. In the dark forest, the fire suddenly rose to the sky. A large number of light beams around him suddenly bloomed, like flowers blooming. Beams of light danced wildly in the lightning that burst out in an instant, sweeping everything. A light curtain made of lightning appeared in front of Heavenly Hound. The dark blue electric arc curled and spread, becoming thicker and thicker. A large number of light beams swept the light curtain and collided with each other, creating sparks. The sparks danced and turned into sparks, burning the forest. The light beams around Gu Hanshan became fewer and fewer, dimmer and dimmer. 8th Supreme Sword Dance? Heavenly Hound smiled playfully and said softly, you are far from it. Boom. As he spoke, the light screen formed by lightning in front of him instantly spread out. Countless electric arcs shuttled through the air, and within a radius of tens of meters, all the trees exploded. Lightning and fire intertwined and spread out. In an instant the dark forest nearby shone with light, and it was as bright as day. The light beams around Gu Hanshan had almost completely disappeared. Only a small amount of fire surrounded him, driving his body to keep retreating. His expression was still calm. As his body flew back, the almost majestic sword intent hit Heavenly Hound's body like a tide. The small amount of fire suddenly became vigorous after a short period of dimming. As his body retreated, a surging wave of fire tens of meters long suddenly appeared in the forest. His body retreated. The raging fire moved forward. The wave of fire rushed to the sky tens of meters high. For a moment the forest and the night seemed to have completely disappeared, and the crazy burning fire occupied all the sight. The dark blue electric arc flashed away. Heavenly Hound moved forward and rushed into the wave of fire tens of meters long alone. He raised one hand and directly grabbed Gu Hanshan's neck. The wind and clouds surged over the forest. A piece of lightning covering a range of hundreds of meters fell without warning. From top to bottom, all the forest in the area covered by the lightning was smashed into dust in an instant. The raging fire on the ground was suppressed in the blink of an eye. In the raging fire, Gu Hanshan's figure became clear again. Heavenly Hound's figure was less than 2 meters away from Gu Hanshan. It's over. His voice was cold and majestic. But under the full blow, there seemed to be a sense of well-concealed weakness in his tone. His palms stretched forward. As the lightning fell, he grabbed Gu Hanshan's neck. Before the smile bloomed from the corner of his mouth, a fatal danger suddenly shrouded his heart. That was the instinct of a supermaster in the face of death, sharp and accurate. Heavenly Hound felt a chill in his heart. Before he could react, Gu Hanshan, who was choked by him, shouted, "Kill!" Because his neck was choked, the roar sounded hoarse and fierce. With the determination to face death calmly, Gu Hanshan straightened his body and attacked with all his strength. In an instant, the fire that was about to die out in the air suddenly surged as if it could burn everything. In the blink of an eye, it covered the visible sky. The air was surging and twisting wildly. There seemed to be ice in the raging fire. The ice flashed and reflected the subtle light of the electric arc. In Heavenly Hound's horrified eyes, Gu Hanshan seemed to suddenly burst out all of his strength, all of his combat capability. Chi controlling, ice condensing, fire flaming. He forcibly touched the thunder-shocking realm. He subconsciously wanted to use force to break Gu Hanshan's neck, but his body suddenly floated up. Even his palm was soft and powerless. Vacuum state. Was this a domain? The domain of an invincible realm expert. A bolt of lightning flashed through Heavenly Hound's mind. At this moment he suddenly realized the origin of the inheritance of the young heavenly son of Zhou state and his capital. Within a radius of 100 meters he formed his own void and was invincible in the world. This was the domain of the invincible realm, and it was also one of the two paths of the invincible realm. Nowadays most of the invincible realm experts took the path of martial arts that formed the void domain by themselves. On this path, Kunlun city of Zhou state claimed to be the best in the world. This might not mean that Kunlun city's domain was the strongest, but their domain was definitely one of the strongest. To put it bluntly, it was because they had two kinds of domains. One of them was the pseudo-domain. It was with this pseudo-domain that Kunlun city could make their real strongest unique skill perfect and even dare to claim to be the best in the world. In theory, this kind of pseudo-domain could only be touched after reaching at least the thunder-shocking realm. But Gu Hanshan was different. Because he had the real, perfect heavenly king heart. Not only did it make his willpower indestructible, but the sharp fighting intuition of the heavenly king heart and the less consumption in the battle were enough for Gu Hanshan to directly use the pseudo-domain when he was in the fire-flaming realm. Although it was very difficult and only for a moment, it was enough to exchange for any result Gu Hanshan wanted. Heavenly Hound's eyes were frightened. His body floated strangely in the air and he opened his mouth as if to say no, but he couldn't make any sound. Above the sky, the fire, the ice, the electric arc and the twisted air all disappeared. There was only the void. Only the void. This was the pseudo-domain of Kunlun city. The 9th style of the 10 skills of true martial arts. Chapter 154. Resume 2 updates. After rushing through the village in front of him, there was an endless forest behind the village. In the drizzle he did not stop. He bypassed the village and rushed to the forest at full speed. It was too late to think about why the initial hunting operation had turned into a survival game. In 3 days he had fought 6 battles in a row, and all of them ended in almost complete defeat. The obvious or hidden communication devices on his body had been completely broken, and the signal he left for the Wang family of Beihai on the way had been erased. His injury had almost reached a critical point. Severe pain and fatigue mixed with involuntary weakness spread all over his body. His strength was draining, his physical strength was declining and his speed was slowing down. Everything in front of him seemed to become hopeless. Only the monster behind him was still tirelessly chasing him. Chasing? Perhaps it was more appropriate to say that he was chasing. After several consecutive battles, there were at least 2 chances when he was infinitely close to death. But at the most critical moment, the other party intentionally or unintentionally withdrew some of his attack power. Although his injuries continued to worsen, he still managed to survive. The pursuit was still going on, neither fast nor slow. It seemed that the other party completely wanted to exhaust him to death. The forest was lush and green. This ancient forest looked a little old. As far as the eye could see, there were towering trees everywhere. The rain fell from the sky, hitting the leaves and falling through the gaps in the treetops. There seemed to be only a kind of quiet, almost beautiful sound of rain left in the whole forest. He wiped away the rain mixed with blood on his face. In the raining forest, there was a handsome face that was firm and peaceful even in a desperate situation. The rain in the air gradually became heavier, falling on the forest and on his face. His face gradually became clean, but his entire person seemed to be in an even more sorry state. His sturdy military boots had been scrapped in the continuous long-distance running. Now he stepped barefoot on the rain-soaked grass. His soft and comfortable clothes were torn everywhere, and a large area of his skin was exposed to the air. Wounds were almost all over his body. Covered with cuts and bruises, he clenched the huge sword in his hand that was nearly 2 meters long and half a meter wide. The violent and sharp momentum continued to rise from his body, but no matter how he looked at it, there was a kind of desolation at the end of the road. After several days of pursuit and rain, he had completely lost his sense of direction. Now he could only rely on his intuition to know where he was heading. He seemed to be heading north. This was the barren mountain area in the northern part of Wuxia. If he kept going north from here, he should be able to enter Juban. There was no goal for him to escape. The outside world was already a dragnet. He kept walking in the wilderness. All he wanted was to survive. If he could escape the pursuit of the monster behind him and get in touch with the Wang family of Beihai, that would be the best. If he couldn't, he could only persevere until hope appeared. No matter what, he couldn't die. Boom! A roar suddenly sounded in the forest behind him. The blazing heat wave swept through the air, whistling incessantly. A small explosive shell that looked exquisite and elegant, dragging an orange tail flame, directly exploded in the forest with an indescribable aura of danger and death. The shell was precisely positioned. At the moment of the explosion, he who was holding a giant sword had already appeared 20 meters away from the explosion range. The strong air wave evaporated the rain, a large number of leaves were lifted up, and the trunk collapsed with a creaking sound. The power of the explosion spread. In the air wave, his body rose and stood on the treetop of a big tree. His face became paler, but his eyes became stern and sharp. Was he finally going to use heavy weapons? He took a deep breath and looked at the rainy sky through the gaps in the treetop. The rain was gradually getting bigger. Being in the forest was his best chance to escape. The monster behind him obviously realized this and directly stepped up the attack. Obviously, it didn't intend to give him any chance. He narrowed his eyes and simply stopped running. Instead, he sat down on the treetop, pulled off a few buttons on his body, crushed them, mixed them with the rainwater, and poured all the powder in the buttons into his mouth. There was no way out, so he could only fight again. In a few days, such a situation had happened several times. Although each battle made his injury more serious, in such a situation, it was hard to say that it was unfair to exchange injuries for time to escape. The rainwater diluted the powder and he swallowed it together with the powder. When the strong medicine began to take effect, the rumbling footsteps sounded at the same time in the depths of the forest. Dull, clear, and domineering. The footsteps were not fast or slow and sounded slowly. It was clearly the footsteps of a person, but stepping in the forest, it gave people the momentum of a powerful army charging at the same time. However, it gave off the impression of a magnificent army charging at the same time. Before they even arrived, that extremely strong sense of oppression had already passed through the rain and hit them in the face. He subconsciously held the giant sword in his hand and whispered to himself, "It really is a monster." In his line of sight, a majestic and burly figure had already gradually appeared. To be more precise, he was a giant that was so majestic and tall that it was unimaginable. A real giant armed to the teeth. More than 2 meters tall, with a broad body, wearing a suit of armor that was not painted with any color, exuding a metallic luster. This was a figure that was almost covered in armor from the soles, knees, legs, waist, abdomen, chest, neck, to the extremely ferocious helmet that was tied up high. His entire body was reflecting a similar luster of a special alloy. He was already extremely tall, and wearing this alloy armor that was full of sci-fi and retro feeling made his body taller again. He looked more than 2.5 meters tall. Just by standing there casually, there was a sense of oppression that made people unable to breathe. Crack! He stood firm under the tree and the armor on his body shook violently. In the eyes of the young man holding the giant sword on the tree, the alloy armor suddenly changed, revealing a ferocious side. The armor that covered almost the entire back of his hand suddenly extended forward again. 2 thick, heavy and sharp arm blades extended from the palm of the armor. The 2 sides of the arm blades weren't empty either. On the 2 palms of the armor, other than the 2 arm blades, There were also 4 pitch-black gun muzzles. The entire armor was changing rapidly, and sharp alloy bayonets extended from the knees and elbows. The shoulders collapsed slightly and 2 muzzles poked out. The muzzles of the 2 machine guns on the chest rotated slightly, covering the entire face of the helmet. The place where the eyes should be was slightly lit up and his eyes were already fixed on his target. In an instant, the originally normal armor had become an unimaginably ferocious appearance. His entire body seemed to have become the most lethal weapon in the blink of an eye. Monster, this was a real metal monster. Under the armor that was at least more than half a ton, the giant's hands clenched and retracted, and both hands suddenly only had the arm blades and muzzles of the armor. He raised his arm and the arm blades pointed at the target on the tree. A dull roar spread out from the helmet. "Come down, you won't die. I won't die and you won't catch me." On the treetop, Wang Xingxiao, the young heavenly son of the Wang family of Beihai, was expressionless. He said blandly, "It's nothing more than repeating the previous process." "Captain, you're too slow." "Captain." There were countless captains in schools, the army, enterprises, the government, and the underworld throughout East Island. But there was only one special one. This was the captain of the Kusanagi force. He was the first super soldier in East Island to succeed in the experiment. He had been upgraded 3 times in a row over the years. Unlike the newly awakened Kusanagi force, the fully armed and fully charged Kusanagi force was a real killing machine. In any case, once such a super force was dispatched, it basically meant that it was invincible and unstoppable. East Island attached great importance to Wang Xingxiao. He was a heavenly son of the thunder-shocking realm with the perfect inheritance of wind and thunder veins. It seemed that it was not safe to send such a person to hunt him down without sending an invincible realm expert. The safest way was to wake up the captain of the Kusanagi force. And the captain lived up to everyone's expectations. In a few days he chased Wang Xingxiao for thousands of kilometers. Alone he completely destroyed the entire system of Zhongzhou state in Wuxia. After a few days of bloody fighting, more than 200 elites of Zhongzhou state died in the hands of the captain in various ways. Now only Wang Xingxiao was still struggling. He was wearing armor that weighed hundreds of kilograms. He was not fast enough, but he was tireless. If there were no accidents, the chase would come to an end in 2 days at most. "You can't run away." The captain looked up at Wang Xingxiao on the treetop, and his dull voice was steady and cold. His order was to capture Wang Xingxiao alive. The heir of the Wang family of Beihai was of extraordinary importance to the entire East Island. Wang Xingxiao, Gu Hanshan, and Li Tianlan. They were the 3 young heavenly sons who were most likely to stand at the peak of Zhongzhou state and even the Dark World in the future. Wang Xingxiao was related to the overall situation of East Island, while Li Tianlan was related to the overall situation of Zhongzhou state. Let's not talk about who was more important. But obviously, East Island was most eager to capture Wang Xingxiao alive. For this reason they did not hesitate to wake up the captain of the Kusanagi force. "Really?" Wang Xingxiao stood on the treetop, clenching the huge sword in his hand. His eyes were strange and cold. His originally pale face turned red with just a few words, and even his breathing quickened. The famous sword of the Wang family of Beihai named Firmament was raised gently. The heavy sword body pierced through the rain curtain and pointed to the sky. The captain's body shook. In an instant all the weapons in his armor were pulled back, leaving only 2 armed sabers. The magical drugs of the Wang family of Beihai could be said to be unparalleled in the world. In the past few days, Wang Xingxiao had relied on all kinds of drugs to maintain his basic combat capability. The captain had been used to this, but the moment Wang Xingxiao raised his sword, he keenly sensed that something was wrong. This time, it seemed different from before. Completely different. Without hesitation, the captain suddenly raised the armed sabers in his arms, and his giant body instantly rushed to the tree where Wang Xingxiao was. At the same time, under the sky, on the sword edge of firmament, a dazzling blue light suddenly lit up. The light expanded in an instant, and the sword intent that had been accumulated for a long time burst out in the blink of an eye in the most violent way. There was a sudden thunder in the sky, and the sound of thunder shook the world. The light on the sword edge spread rapidly. In an instant, a huge blue sword with a length of 100 meters had taken shape. The lightning surged and gathered, and the continuous thunder shook the forest. The extremely explosive sword intent surged down from the sky in an overwhelming way. Crack. The captain's body hit the tree directly. The thick and sturdy tree was instantly smashed into pieces. Wang Xingxiao held the sword stiffly and soared into the sky. His figure flew higher and higher. At this moment, all the sword intent and killing in the world seemed to be stepped on by him alone. The unique skill of the Wang family of Beihai, against the way of heaven. He forcibly burned his potential with a seriously injured body that had just entered the thunder-shocking realm. This extremely short sword strike vaguely had the momentum of the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. The trunk was broken and the branches were mixed with leaves flying in the rain. The captain stood under the tree and suddenly looked up. In his sight, the rain all over the sky fell with a pitter-patter. Wang Xingxiao's body flew higher and higher, and he seemed to have become blurred in the lightning. In a trance he raised the sword edge in the air. The thick and heavy famous sword firmament instantly turned into an arc that seemed to be formed by nature. The 100-meter-long giant sword made of lightning in the air chopped down with the force of Wang Xingxiao's sword swing. The whole world seemed to disappear in an instant. There was only a bolt of lightning falling from the sky, like the will of heaven and earth, and all things surrendered to it, destroying everything. After going against the way of heaven, the unique skill of the Wang family of Beihai, the sword of heavenly law. Above the lightning, Wang Xingxiao held firmament and stabbed it straight down. His eyes were resolute and silent. In the heavy rain he seemed to have disappeared, leaving only a will that broke out to the extreme. Sword intent, martial arts, glory, future, everything disappeared in his mind. Under the sword of heavenly law. It was heaven and earth. Boom. The lightning and the sword edge fell almost at the same time. In the heavy rain, the endless light that shone in the world rose to the sky in the forest in the rain. Within a radius of 100 meters, all the dust, trees, rainwater, and grass were completely destroyed by the light. The whistling airwaves swept through the forest, and a large, desolate, almost dazzling blank space suddenly appeared in the forest. Chapter 155. The ruins were desolate and silent at night. Moderate rain, no moon, and strong wind. A lot of garbage was piled up and some scrapped machines were scattered everywhere. As the strong wind roared, some paper scraps and plastic bags in the ruins kept flying in the wind, and then they were hit by the rain. The windows of the dilapidated buildings were completely broken, and several dangerous buildings were slightly tilted. Behind the windows was a dark space that seemed to swallow everything. This was an abandoned factory in the suburbs of Changdao. The factory covered an area of 300 acres, which showed the prosperity of its heyday. But as it went bankrupt in the financial crisis a few years ago, it became extremely desolate. This kind of uninhabited, dirty, messy, and poor place was the favorite of many homeless people and beggars in Changdao. It was also the best place for some gangs to fight and trade. Similarly, because of the messy internal facilities of the factory and the complicated terrain, it was also the best place to hide. In the dark wind and rain, there was a vague shadow cutting through the darkness. The speed of the shadow was extremely fast. In the dim environment it flashed and disappeared. It was so fast that it was almost an illusion. The shadow rushed through the factory and without any hesitation, it rushed directly into the dark space inside the factory. The wind and rain were dark. The pervading night was getting darker and the whole world was dark. Messy footsteps sounded in the distance, accompanied by car horns and sirens, coming closer and closer. The rotors of the armed helicopters whistled and the airflow surged in the air. From the sky to the ground, countless bright lights shone in the factory, and countless areas of the whole factory were shrouded by the light in the fastest time. The beams formed by the lights crossed in the darkness, and the raindrops became more and more obvious. The rumbling footsteps were already close to the factory. Concise and effective orders were issued one after another in an orderly manner. People in police uniforms or civilian clothes, armed with guns, rushed into the factory in a large number of groups, keeping an attacking posture and searching. Time passed slowly. The group at the front took the lead and rushed into the building closest to the gate. Submachine guns with infrared light glanced around nervously. In the quiet and almost dead silence, the sound of heartbeats even suppressed the sound of footsteps. Everyone could almost hear their rapid and explosive heartbeats. The other teams rushed up to the second floor. After the team on the first floor confirmed that there was nothing, they finally let out a long sigh. After a brief silence, the team leader took out the walkie-talkie and said in a hoarse voice, "Building 1, the first floor is safe." They didn't know who they were besieging, but in a war like this, it didn't matter who they were besieging. The most important issue was how much damage the target could cause. The scale of this encirclement was enough to explain everything. Long Island Special Police, Ordinary Police, the Underworld, and the occasional recognized experts who disguised themselves in the underworld but actually belonged to the military, and some people whose identities were not clear but had very special privileges: helicopters, rocket launchers, sniper rifles. The bombardment and precision attacks were balanced, and the dense firepower coverage was also extremely complete. Such a scale was enough to show how powerful the encirclement was, and how dangerous the other party was. The danger had already been demonstrated. After 12 hours of continuous pursuit, they suffered countless casualties. After 3 superiors of the Thundershocking realm and 7 or 8 superiors of the Fire-Flaming realm died in a row, Changdao finally made the most intense response. They started to use all kinds of forces to besiege and intercept the target at all costs. The search team had to come because of the need of work. But it was the greatest luck that they didn't find the target, which was basically a dead target. Next, let's see who was unlucky enough to meet the lunatic. Building 1, the 3rd floor is safe. Building 1, the 5th floor is safe. Building 1, the 1st floor is safe. Please move. At the gate of the factory, amid the busy scene of people coming in and out, 3 figures stood quietly in front of the gate, waiting for all the search team's reports. Among the 3, 2 of the middle-aged men were no longer young. The middle-aged man on the left was about 50 years old. He was short, but he looked strong and valiant. The other man was fat, and under the light his face was covered with oil. At this moment the fat middle-aged man was holding an umbrella for the person in the middle. His waist was slightly bent, as if he wanted to stay away from the person next to him, but he didn't dare to let the person get wet. He could only try to reach out his hand, making a very strange posture. The rain had soaked most of his body, but he didn't realize it. He just smiled humbly. Many search teams coming and going saw this scene, and they were a little stunned, but they didn't dare to say anything. This fat middle-aged man, who was like a pug trying to please its master, could be regarded as an out-and-out big shot in the whole Changdao. He was Tufei Tianguang, the director of the Changdao Police Department. If this identity wasn't enough, he could add the title of a member of Yamaguchi-gumi, which was enough to prove that this fat pig had the ability to be omnipotent in both the underworld and the underworld in Changdao. But now Tufei Tianguang was acting like this, which was completely contrary to his identity. Everyone subconsciously looked at Tufei Tianguang's side. The night rain was killing. The wind was howling. In the cold and dangerous environment, the red dress seemed to be the origin of the surging tenderness between heaven and earth. It was a young woman dressed in red. The high slit of her dress exposed her snow-white slender legs to the air. Her black waist-length hair was neatly combed. Her exquisite, almost perfect face seemed a little pale and haggard, but that frail beauty only added to her charm. She stood quietly beside Tufei Tianguang, letting the fat pig next to her hold an umbrella for her. Her eyes, which were as bright as cold stars, stared straight at the factory through the rain, expressionless. The red dress was like fire. The momentum was like water. The water seemed to be flowing softly in the deep night, but it carried a kind of biting charm and danger. Mai Shiranui, the young palace master of Liuhua Palace and the young heavenly son of East Island. Nearby search teams were coming and going. Mai Shiranui completely ignored the strange and intoxicated gazes around her and listened to the report from the walkie-talkie. She picked up the walkie-talkie and said in a crisp, cold and strangely delicate voice, "Stay put in the first building. Report to the other teams. The first floor of the second building is safe. The third floor of the second building is safe. The second building is safe." Mai Shiranui was silent for a moment and then said calmly, The periphery operation is going well. We have almost completed the encirclement and are checking the blind spots. Turn on the satellite images and thermal imaging. It's useless, but we can be sure that the target hasn't left the factory. The third building. The first floor of the third building is safe. The second floor of the third building is safe. The third floor is found. Bang 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 bang. Violent gunshots suddenly sounded from the walkie-talkie, as if countless notes that symbolized death had suddenly exploded, roaring in everyone's ears. Target found. Target found. Everyone attack and surround the third building. With a sharp and rapid roar, my Shiranui, who was standing at the door, shot straight into the factory. The air was scorching hot, and for a moment, all the rain was completely evaporated on her way. In her sight, the red figure flashed and went away in an instant. Requesting support. Enemy. Enemy. Group 6 was silent. Group 9 was silent. Group 5 was silent. My God, there's still someone alive. He's coming up and he's very fast. Request helicopter. Bang bang bang. In the gunshots, the roar from the third building fell silent. When the gunshots stopped, the whole walkie-talkie was dead silent. Tufei Tianguang opened his mouth and was about to speak when a little fire lit up in the distance through the rain. The fire swayed and expanded in an instant. The whole third building was suddenly in a sea of fire. The fiery red dress soared into the sky in the flames and rushed straight to the third floor. Her sharp voice echoed in a large area, sharp and cold. Li Tianlan, you can't run away. Boom. Before my Shiranui's voice had died away, the fire in the third building twisted slightly, and then a large fire rose. For a moment, the raging fire occupied everyone's sight. All the gunshots disappeared completely, and the endless flames merged with each other and then reignited again. The sword intent as cold as winter howled and rose in the whole floor. The sword energy rushed into the sky, and the extremely powerful sword intent swept everything. Under the sword intent, the raging fire suddenly condensed in my Shiranui's sharp voice. Countless flames gathered in an instant and turned into a huge fireball in the blink of an eye. The gloomy night was completely lit up by the fire. My Shiranui finally saw the opponent in front of her again, who had been fighting with her for a few days and was getting crazier instead of weaker. The sharp and heavy silver spear came across the air, but it was driven by the extremely sharp and crazy sword intent. A little condensed fire lit up on the tip of the spear. The long spear stabbed straight. My Shiranui held up the huge fireball with both hands and slammed it down. The silver spear tip and the fireball collided fiercely. The raging flames silently swept across the sky. There was no sound at all. But in an instant, dense cracks appeared on the entire building. Boom. The violent sound suppressed my Shiranui's scream. The entire building, which was covered in cracks, collapsed in an instant. Countless stones were blown away in the intense fire and rain. The building collapsed and dust rose directly from the air along with the flames. Black smoke billowed. My Shiranui, in a red dress covered with dust, rushed out of the collapsed ruins with the fire and scanned the surroundings vigilantly. Chapter 156. Wandering, sneaking, flashing, dashing. Light and darkness alternated in the hustle and bustle of people. A large number of people rushed into the factory. At a certain second, a sudden gunshot rang out in the noisy crowd. All the sounds instinctively stopped for a moment. In the crisp crack, a nearby searchlight that had just been set up nearby directly shattered. The fragments danced in the last light. All the light suddenly shattered and disappeared. The gun was hidden in the dark. People lurked in the noisy unknown. The last light in the messy and fine light disappeared. In the gale and the night rain, the area near the factory instantly became dark. Quick steps. Charge. In the crowd that became a little chaotic at the first time, several figures in front of them were directly knocked away. The silver edge flashed in the darkness. The spearhead of the human emperor stuck out and turned into a delicate and slightly long dagger. Darkness fell. The moment the silver light flashed, a faint flame lit up. The flame appeared and went out in a flash. In the dull and subtle sound, a desperate whimper sounded and disappeared immediately. Swish. The helicopter roared in the air, and the searchlight hanging on the helicopter had turned around as soon as the area fell into darkness. The whole process took no more than 3 seconds. Light and darkness alternated and the crowd surged. Everything seemed to be the same as 3 seconds ago, but a sudden roar suddenly rang out in the crowd, making everyone's heart sink. Zhou Xian. In the chaotic situation, this roar with great anger spread clearly through the whole place. Although the voice was loud, there was a strong sense of powerlessness and despair between the lines. My Shiranui appeared almost before her voice died away. In the subconscious silence of countless people, this female heavenly son of East Island narrowed her eyes tightly, and there was an amazing murderous look in her eyes. Less than 20 meters ahead of her, A young man in casual clothes stood stiffly in place with a gun in his arms. At the moment of danger he seemed to realize something and opened his mouth subconsciously. So the sharp blade of the dagger stabbed directly into his mouth. The blade went up and the sharp edge directly pierced through the back of his head from his mouth. Blood burst out of his head and sprayed more than 2 meters high in the rain. The whole scene could be said to be extremely cruel and violent. When the light went out he committed the crime. When the light went on he disappeared. Everything happened almost in the blink of an eye. When my Shiranui appeared, one could even clearly see the blood gushing into the sky falling from the sky. The scarlet blood glowed dreamily in the light of the searchlight. Falling. Ono opened his mouth wide and subconsciously grabbed his companion's arm. The light in his eyes quickly disappeared, and he finally collapsed on the grass that was dripping with rain and blood. It was an almost flawless assassination without any flaws. If it was an ordinary person it would be fine. But the victim was not an ordinary person. On the contrary, he could be regarded as an expert even among the fire-flaming realm experts. But such an expert was successfully assassinated within a few seconds, and he didn't even have time to send out a warning signal. The strong wind blew my Shiranui's red dress, and her silky long hair fluttered in the wind and rain at night. She looked quietly at the fallen body in front of her, but her heart was unprecedentedly cold. It was bone-chilling. From Ninghu to Changdao, a distance of more than 800 kilometers, they chased all the way. In the beginning Li Tianlan was running and she was chasing. But gradually his injuries seemed to be getting better at an incomprehensible speed. His condition was getting better and better, and the simple escape turned into fighting and running at the same time. When Mai Shiranui finally realized that she might not be able to suppress this guy by herself, she finally used her identity as the young palace master of Liuhua Palace and asked all the forces in East Island to cooperate in the chase. Ninghu, Kaishan and now Changdao. Mai Shiranui had no idea how many elites and experts she had lost in this pursuit, but she could clearly feel the growing anger in Li Tianlan's heart. It was not the rage of losing reason. This kind of anger was cold and stern, showing a kind of extreme stubbornness and ruthlessness. Now Li Tianlan was in the crowd below. Although she didn't know who he was, Mai Shiranui was sure that in the current situation, as long as she took advantage of the panic of the crowd, it would not be difficult for Li Tianlan to escape. At that time it might be a new pursuit. But Li Tianlan didn't seem to have any intention of escaping. Hiding in the crowd, he was like a god of death walking in the dark. Curb violence with violence, stop killing with killing. Mai Shiranui knew very well that the relentless pursuit for dozens of hours had completely infuriated the young heavenly son from Zhongzhou state. To be precise, now Li Tianlan was in a killing frenzy. He was in a killing frenzy. And now she had to deal with a madman who had completely fallen into an extremely calm and fanatical state of killing. The helicopter roared and hovered in the air. The bright light of the searchlight kept rotating, illuminating the crowd below. But there were so many people below that it was unrealistic to find Li Tianlan in the crowd in a short time. Mai Shiranui took a deep breath and her bulging chest rose and fell slightly. She opened her mouth and was about to speak when a phone suddenly rang. She picked up the phone and answered. On the other end of the phone, a soft and gloomy voice came directly through the phone. "Haven't you caught Li Tianlan yet?" It was to catch, not to kill. It was a difference of one word, but the meaning was completely different. Mai Shiranui looked stern and gently bit her pink lower lip. Her voice was soft and apologetic. "Yes, teacher, please give me some more time, please." "I can give you the time." After a short silence, Shinichi Miyamoto, the only invincible realm expert in East Island, said blandly, "But you have to give me an accurate time. I'm under a lot of pressure now." Mai Shiranui clenched the phone and was silent for nearly half a minute. Then she said firmly, 1 week. "Teacher, 7 days is enough for me." 7 days? Shinichi Miyamoto smiled, showing no satisfaction or dissatisfaction. He just said in a bland tone, "Mai, you seem to be in big trouble." Mai Shiranui was a little embarrassed. She fought on her home ground and used the connections and resources of Liuhua Palace, but she failed to catch Li Tianlan in dozens of hours. Instead she kept losing people. This was simply incompetence. She didn't want to admit her failure, but now she had to give an explanation. "Yes." She held the phone and whispered, "The other party is very difficult. He was unexpectedly difficult to deal with. So if possible I hope you can let me kill him, not capture him alive." Kill him? Shinichi Miyamoto smiled again, but his tone became a little cold. Although it's not convenient for me to leave the Divine Wind Force for the time being, if I want to kill Li Tianlan, I won't let you do it. Now there is an invincible realm killer in the Divine Wind Force. Don't you understand what I mean? Mai Shiranui was silent, letting the rain pour on her, wet her hair and wet her cheeks. No matter what, I want him alive. Remember, this is the action of Liuhua Palace. You stay in the Divine Wind Force all year round, but don't forget where your foundation is. Shinichi Miyamoto said coldly and then hung up the phone. Bang! In the sudden gunshot, the searchlight hanging on the helicopter exploded again. The broken light fluttered in the air for a moment. Darkness suddenly fell. Mai Shiranui's face changed dramatically. As soon as the light disappeared, a large piece of fire suddenly spread out around her. Before the darkness fell completely, the fire had already lit up everything around her. The rainwater scattered in the air, bringing with it a splatter of blood. Another figure stood in place, almost lifeless. The moment the fire lit up, Mai Shiranui only saw a flash of silver light. The silver edge shrank back in the body of the assassin, and the blood drew a line of blood 2 or 3 meters long with the blade. Blood sprayed and the sword pierced the heart. The dead body was surrounded by East Island elites, whose faces were livid with fear. But Li Tianlan had already switched places with the shadow and no one knew where he was. Another fire-flaming realm expert was assassinated, and it was a fatal blow. Mai Shiranui's body shook and her face was pale. Looking at the scene in front of her, she didn't hesitate and said loudly, "Everyone stay away from each other in groups for 1 minute. After 1 minute, anyone who is alone will be killed without reporting." The panicked crowd reflexively began to move their bodies. Mai Shiranui didn't even bother to look at them. Needless to say, such a gathering would not lead to anything. With the shadow formula, Li Tianlan's mobility was unparalleled. 1 minute was enough for him to leave the scene. Shooting, sprinting, killing, retreating. The crowd was in a panic. But in Li Tianlan's world, everything seemed to have disappeared. His mind was clearer than ever and every move seemed to be driven by instinct. Lurking quietly, shooting secretly and subtly and assassinating accurately and cruelly. It was unbelievably sharp. Li Tianlan could clearly realize what was happening. He was hiding, acting and killing. He did all of this, but he had an omniscient and omnipotent perspective like watching a movie. After days of fleeing and hunting, his spirit was in a real state of tension at all times. His spirit was in a state of real tension at all times. For Li Tianlan, this was a scene that he had never experienced before. Predicament, desperate situation and escape. His will was as hard as iron. In this state of concentration, Li Tianlan could be said to be making progress every minute and second. It was as if his inexhaustible potential had become a real keen perception and judgment of danger. The use of the shadow formula became more and more mature, and the extraordinary keenness that belonged to the real heavenly king heart seemed to be appearing in him little by little. Wandering between light and darkness, exploding and assassinating, blood flew with the killing intent in the rainy night. He went all out, incisively and heartily. He could clearly feel that his killing intent was becoming more and more complete, and he was constantly becoming stronger. It was not an improvement in realm, but another sublimation of his state of mind and perception. The crowd gathered in a tense atmosphere. In a very short period of time, Li Tianlan, who had killed 4 fire-flaming realm experts, sighed softly. After switching places with his shadow twice, his figure had already appeared inside building number 2. In the increasingly dark environment, through the empty window separated by the messy curtain of rain, the helicopter outside the window was still flying proudly, its rotors whistling. Li Tianlan's eyes were cold and he turned to go upstairs. Near building number 2, under the order of Mai Shiranui, a large number of people had gathered into nearly 100 action groups, without showing any flaws. Sure enough, he was gone. Mai Shiranui sighed softly, but there was a strange smile in her eyes. The terrain here was open. Even if Li Tianlan had the shadow formula, he could not disappear completely in the blink of an eye. He would leave here, but he must find a suitable place to hide. The second building was the only suitable hiding place in the vicinity. Apart from that, there was no other choice. She suddenly picked up the walkie-talkie in her hand and said in a cold tone, "The helicopter is ready to strafe building number 2 according to the floor." The others are on standby and ready to rush in at any time. If it were not for the consideration of catching him alive, it would be the most convenient to blow up the whole building with a missile. Even if Li Tianlan did not die, he would at least be blown out. But Shinichi Miyamoto's order was strict enough, and it seemed that only machine guns and autocannons could be used at the moment. For people like Li Tianlan, it was not something fatal. With the dull roar of the rotors, the helicopter body quickly rotated. The nose of the helicopter was aimed at building number 2 in front of it. The 2 autocannons, which could fire more than thousands of bullets in a minute, slightly adjusted the angle and then fired without hesitation. Da-da-da. In the violent and chaotic sound, countless bullets swept into the building through the empty windows like raindrops, and countless sparks flew directly. Clang, clang, clang. Dense echoes suddenly rang out, making the sound of a large number of bullets hitting the steel plate. Mai Shiranui's eyes lit up. Before she could speak, 2 searchlights shone again directly at building number 2. The lights turned. The autocannons roared. Vaguely, a heavy metal plate seemed to be lifted and moved at high speed, and all the autocannon's bullets hit the plate. The plate trembled violently, but the person holding it did not stop moving all the way up. He's on the 3rd floor. Lock on the target, fire, keep firing. He's on the 4th floor. Attention everyone, the target is on the 4th floor. On the 5th floor. Damn it, why did you stop? Are you out of bullets? Machine guns, and the others get ready to charge. The helicopter turned around in the air. The cabin door opened. The machine gunner was in position. The searchlights shone into the window on the 5th floor and swept back and forth. 5th floor. He's on the 5th floor and he didn't go up. Oh hell, he's rushing over. What does he want to do? My God. In the helicopter pilot's hurried and strange tone, the 2 lights finally locked on Li Tianlan. The machine gunner grinned grimly and was about to fire. In the space on the 5th floor, Li Tianlan, holding a metal plate in his hand, rushed directly toward the helicopter. The 2 sides were less than 100 meters apart. Under the searchlights, it was still a calm and indifferent face. He strode, sprinted and ran. His speed was getting faster and faster and his strides were getting bigger and bigger. In the machine gunner's incredulous eyes, his figure lifted the steel plate and rushed directly out of the window. His body suddenly rose in the wind and rain. The metal plate was discarded casually. Before the dumbfounded machine gunner could pull the trigger, a silver light flashed in the air. The more than 2-meter-tall human emperor crossed the night and rushed into the cabin. It directly drove his body and nailed him to the other side of the cabin. Li Tianlan's figure slammed into the cabin in the air. Mai Shiranui, who had already reached the 2nd building, changed her face dramatically. Almost subconsciously she screamed, "Take cover." This helicopter looked ordinary, but in fact, it was the most advanced armed helicopter in service in East Island today. With complete heavy firepower, she knew very well how much damage the helicopter would cause once it fell into the hands of the enemy. The helicopter suddenly swayed in the air. Gunshots rang out. The 2 pilots were thrown directly out of the helicopter. In Mai Shiranui's somewhat frightened eyes, the helicopter in the air was still swaying, rising, lowering, swaying left and right. What's going on? Mai Shiranui, who had hidden her body, looked stunned. Vaguely, there was a voice drifting down from the helicopter with the wind, and it was extremely vague in the roar of the rotors. Asterisks. It can't be different. How, where? In the loud roar, the voice was faint and small. Only a master with amazing hearing could hear these words. This was... The corner of Mai Shiranui's beautiful mouth twitched suddenly. At this moment she finally understood that the heavenly son of Zhou State, who had just jumped into the helicopter like a mighty god of war, didn't know how to fly a helicopter at all. At the same time, in a corner a little farther away from the crowd but would not arouse suspicion, there was also a figure looking at the helicopter swaying in the air like an acrobat, with dull eyes. He didn't know how to fly it? Then what the *CK were you doing up there? This was the young heavenly son of Zhou State? This was Qin Weibai's man? He was really stupidly cute. Under the expectant gaze of the crowd, there seemed to be an angry roar coming from the helicopter. *CK. The big guy floating in the air finally stopped struggling and swaying, and the huge fuselage quickly smashed to the ground. This time there was no need to remind them. Everyone dodged quickly. The helicopter crashed to the ground and its fuselage glided at an angle. Several East Island elites who didn't have time to escape were involved in it and instantly turned into a pile of minced meat. The wildly spinning rotors rubbed against the ground violently. The turf, dirt, and sparks flew at the same time. The fuselage rubbed against the ground and crashed directly into the lobby of building number 2. The tail of the helicopter was broken and on fire. Its huge body smashed the column in front of the lobby, squeezed in and hit the wall. In the billowing black smoke and fire, the helicopter swelled slightly. Then came the most ferocious explosion. A great deal of fire and black smoke rose in a flash in building number 2. The fire burned the whole building and black smoke surged out of every window upstairs and downstairs. Li Tianlan, who had landed safely, completely ignored the crowd around him. The moment he landed, he rushed to building number 2 and Mai Shiranui without hesitation. To be exact, he rushed to the fire that burned the whole building in front of building number 2. Several East Island experts near him subconsciously wanted to intercept him. The silver edge spread in Li Tianlan's two-handed swords and turned into 2 swords. Bin. The 8th blade burning heaven. The whistling sword intent shattered the night rain. In the midst of the fierce wind, the raging fire with sword energy instantly formed a natural arc. Li Tianlan's body rose into the air, bypassing Mai Shiranui, and his body spun, flying higher and higher. Mai Shiranui raised her head subconsciously. In her sight, the raging fire in the whole building seemed to be attracted by this sword, and the fire gathered toward Li Tianlan's sword edge. The sword momentum of the 8th blade had not fallen. The 9th blade had already appeared in the night sky. Li Tianlan's joints shook violently. As soon as the 9th blade came out, the sword momentum had already reached the 10th blade. After dusk came the vast expanse. The 3 swords broke out almost at the same time. The raging sword intent rose again and again as if there was no end. In an instant the sky was broken. The fire that burned as bright as day disappeared. The night reappeared. Mai Shiranui stood on the ground, her whole body tense, staring at Li Tianlan, or rather at the sword tip on his sword edge that was as hot as the sun. Li Tianlan's body rose into the air and he raised the sword with both hands. The sword pierced the night sky. The sword tip that was as bright as the sun trembled slightly. The fire that was condensed to the extreme suddenly spread throughout the world. The night rain was instantly enveloped by the flames that seemed to destroy the world. The world was a fiery red. The fierce wind blew and all the rain seemed to have color. It had the color of raging fire. Water and fire condensed in an instant. The rainwater was mixed with the glow of fire, and it was like the stars in the universe were falling down. The sword intent was like a tide enveloping the world. Chapter 157. The meteor fell. The rain of fire destroyed the world. The rainy sky was completely lit up in an instant. The flames rushed into the heavy rain and entangled with each other. The sword rain fell and crashed down. The whole factory showed a doomsday-like dim yellow under the sword rain. The raging fire mixed with the sword intent and the rain suddenly exploded in the whole sky. The damp environment instantly became extremely dry. The water on the ground evaporated into gas and turned into a whistling wind. The wind blew and turned into twisted air. With Li Tianlan as the center, the crowd nearby became completely chaotic. In the twisted and blowing wind, ice light lit up on the ground. As soon as the ice light flashed, Li Tianlan had already said again, "Stop." The biting wind, the people on the ground, and the rain in the air. There was a moment of pause. Only the raindrops mixed with fire and sword intent fell gracefully and quickly, with an unparalleled aura of death. Everything happened in less than a second. The twisted air turned into a sharp blade and suddenly spread. The edge of the stop incantation tore the ice layer. The fire rain in the air fell on the ground and people's bodies without any pause. The hot temperature swept everything. The raindrops exploded and the raging fire mixed with the sword intent surged out. Circle after circle of fire rose from the crowd, and helpless and desperate screams resounded in every corner nearby. A large number of people struggled crazily. Some were charred in the raging fire and some were torn apart by the sword intent. The whole scene was filled with a strong smell of barbecued meat and burnt flesh. Broken limbs fell wantonly in the fire, and the sticky blood was diluted by the rain, and then evaporated by the fire. The hot fire burned everything nearby under the curtain of rain. The air had become extremely dry, and the billowing black smoke made it difficult for everyone to open their eyes. Li Tianlan's body shook violently. After the extremely strong sword intent, few people noticed that he had become unprecedentedly weak. The 8th blade, the 9th blade and the 10th blade. The stop incantation. These were all superficial. In fact, Li Tianlan had begun to burn his potential and directly made his strength temporarily reach the peak of the fire-flaming realm or even the half-step thundershocking realm. Using 4 unique skills in a row at the peak of the fire-flaming realm could be said to be Li Tianlan's strongest blow in a normal state. The moment the human emperor sword was raised, the sword intent had already rushed into the thundershocking realm. In terms of power alone, this strike was definitely the power of the thundershocking realm. A pitch-black shadow appeared on the ground. Li Tianlan changed his position in an instant. The moment his body landed, he staggered and almost fell to the ground. Li Tianlan took a deep breath. There seemed to be countless stars flashing before his eyes. He gritted his teeth, but before he could leave, a vicious scream rang out behind him. Li Tianlan. The scorching waves of fire were like 2 torrents. 2 small and exquisite folding fans suddenly spun in the air. The folding fans spun crazily in the air, tearing through the air and igniting a fire in the rain. Mai Shiranui followed closely behind, almost pouncing on him at all costs. As the initiator, Li Tianlan might not know the impact and consequences of that sword strike on Mai Shiranui, or even if he knew, he didn't bother to think about it. But he didn't know that Mai Shiranui was completely in a state of madness and rage after that sword strike. Everything that happened tonight, all the elites, all the weapons, none of them had been authorized by the government to appear here. To put it bluntly, such a high-standard scene tonight was entirely Mai Shiranui's own will. Perhaps to some extent, it could also represent the will of Liuhua Palace. But whether it was Liuhua Palace, Jifeng Sword Training School or the largest martial arts force, Wuji Palace, they were, in a sense, civil martial arts forces. Strictly speaking, they had no official identity or authorization at all. It was the divine wind force, not Liuhua Palace, that had such authority. As the young palace master of Liuhua Palace, she mobilized such a large-scale force without official authorization. If she succeeded, it would be fine. But if she failed, the pressure on the entire Liuhua Palace would multiply, and Mai Shiranui's reputation as a young heavenly son would be greatly affected and her prestige would be lost. But the current situation could no longer be described as a failure. Several thundershocking realm experts had died. More than 10 fire-flaming realm experts had died and countless elites had been lost. This was simply a fiasco that could not be ignored. If she couldn't catch Li Tianlan with such a loss, Mai Shiranui couldn't imagine what would happen to her. The 2 folding fans rushed directly to Li Tianlan with a subtle and tempting aroma. Their momentum was like thunder. Just by looking at their momentum, they were just like 2 missiles with burning tail flames, with the momentum to tear everything apart. Ninjutsu. Li Tianlan glanced at her and twitched the corner of his mouth. In Mai Shiranui's sight, his body suddenly disappeared. The next moment he had dodged the 2 folding fans and pounced directly on her. Mai Shiranui gritted her teeth and suddenly made a seal with both hands. Ninjutsu, boomerang. The 2 folding fans turned around in an instant. 2 torrents of flames spread into one and rushed to Li Tianlan's body. Swish. The 2 folding fans passed through Li Tianlan's waist, but there was no blood. Shadow. Mai Shiranui's heart sank and she turned her eyes subconsciously. On the other side of her line of sight, Li Tianlan, who had released his shadow, once again switched places with his 3rd shadow. When Mai Shiranui looked over, he happened to turn around slightly and punch the air in front of him. The air around Mai Shiranui vibrated. The shadow in front of her raised its hand at the same time and punched at Mai Shiranui. Mai Shiranui moved sideways to avoid the punch. At the moment when the shadow dissipated, a sickly flush suddenly appeared on her charming and delicate face. She lowered her body slightly. A great deal of air around her squeezed toward her body. Mai Shiranui stepped forward and suddenly rushed toward Li Tianlan like an arrow leaving the bow. Ninjutsu charge. All the air seemed to be turned into a huge propelling force. Mai Shiranui's body was like a red light, and the explosive speed instantly narrowed the distance between her and Li Tianlan. Her face was scratched by the cold wind in the sprint, but Mai Shiranui ignored it and took a deep breath. Her face turned from flushed to pale in an instant. A full blow. Ninjutsu blade. Mai Shiranui's body disappeared in an instant. With her as the center, the raging fire condensed into countless sharp blades, shooting in all directions. Within a radius of hundreds of meters, there was a sudden burst of fire. Such a large attack range had completely exceeded the distance between Li Tianlan and the shadow. Li Tianlan's body suddenly stopped and the blades approached. He turned around. But before he could give my Shiranui a fatal blow at the risk of aggravating his injury, a wall of fire suddenly rose from his side. The fire was thick and warm without the slightest sense of burning. All the flame blades around my Shiranui hit the wall of fire like a rainstorm, and the whole wall became taller and thicker in the constant trembling. Immovable as a mountain. A figure in an East Island police uniform appeared beside Li Tianlan and grabbed his arm. "It's almost time. Let's go east." Perfect Chinese without the slightest foreign accent rang out. Li Tianlan froze for a moment. In his sight was a young, confident and indifferent face. This was a young man who looked 23 or 24 years old at most. He was about 1.8 meters tall, but his body was extremely straight and resolute. His face was delicate and clean, and his lips were tightly pursed, giving people a very firm and even a little cold feeling. The two looked at each other slightly. The young man raised the corners of his mouth and smiled calmly and indifferently. But while he was smiling, Li Tianlan was keenly aware of the other's eyes. There was no smile in those dark and deep eyes. As the light flickered, they were all unfathomable darkness and depth. It seemed to be a kind of fatalistic instinct and intuition. The moment they looked at each other in a dangerous situation, Li Tianlan told himself that this man might not be hostile to him now, but it was difficult for them to be friends. This feeling was so clear and obvious that it had taken root in his heart in an instant. It was deeply rooted in his heart. "Go." The young man gently pushed Li Tianlan and turned around abruptly. The moment Mai Shiranui appeared, he raised his eyebrows slightly and punched directly at her without hesitation. Mai Shiranui, who had fully accumulated her strength, collided with the young man's fist. In the fire, airwaves shot out in an instant. Their bodies flew backward at the same time. The distance between them was instantly pulled apart. The young man's body flew backward and rushed past Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan grabbed his body. Shadow formula transposition. Transposition. Transposition again. In the blink of an eye, the distance between them and Mai Shiranui was getting farther and farther. Behind them, Mai Shiranui's cold voice sounded faintly. "Thousands of miles of rivers and mountains? Go east. I noticed there before I came. There is a path about 3 kilometers long that can lead us into the deep mountain. Let's get rid of them inside and talk about other things." Li Tianlan and the young man rushed into the woods of the factory and moved forward quickly. The young man who punched Mai Shiranui was calm and said in a calm tone. Li Tianlan subconsciously glanced behind him. Across the woods of the factory, everything behind him was faintly visible, and there seemed to be a fire. The crowd behind him was busy putting out the fire. With an unknown companion by his side, Mai Shiranui would never dare to catch up with him alone. "This chase seems to be over again?" Li Tianlan laughed self-deprecatingly. After dozens of hours, he had almost gotten used to the chase and the escape. The two rushed into the woods of the factory one after the other and rushed out again, following the path pointed out by the young man. In front of them was an undulating hillside. The two rushed all the way. After passing several hillsides in a row, there was still silence and quietness behind them. Li Tianlan finally slowed down. Almost at the same time, the young man beside him also slowed down. "Thank you." Li Tianlan's expression was calm and he said calmly, "What's your name?" The sudden appearance of this so-called companion was too strange. Li Tianlan would not completely trust him unless he was a fool. However, even if he really had ulterior motives, it was much better than staying in the factory. So after a little hesitation, Li Tianlan finally followed him. "You don't know me." The young man turned to look at Li Tianlan with a smile. His tone was gentle and his face was bright, but his eyes were still as deep and calm as dead silence. "But I've heard a lot about you. Li Tianlan, right?" He paused, took the initiative to reach out his hand and said with a chuckle, "Let me introduce myself. I'm Jiang Shangyu from the Deep Sea Academy." Deep Sea Academy, Jiang Shangyu. Among the top 10 experts of the young generation, Jiang Shangyu was second only to Wang Xingxiao and Gu Hanshan. It was no exaggeration to say that even now Jiang Shangyu could be said to be the most famous young expert besides Wang Xingxiao and Gu Hanshan. His reputation was even higher than that of Li Tianlan, who had just appeared in Zhou state. The first person under the heavenly sun. For Li Tianlan this was a real surprise. Taking a deep breath, Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes, held Jiang Shangyu's hand and said with a chuckle, "Senior brother Jiang, I've also heard a lot about you. Isn't it better to meet you in person?" Jiang Shangyu said with a smile. "It's better to meet you in person," Li Tianlan said in a serious tone. He was telling the truth. Under the heavenly sun? Li Tianlan didn't know if this statement was correct, but from the first time he saw him he felt that this person was very scary. He was scary. Jiang Shangyu smiled and said no more. He just looked at the vast mountains in the night. After a moment of silence he said calmly, "Let's get out of here first." Li Tianlan nodded and said calmly, "Senior brother Jiang, how do you know I'm here?" "Don't call me senior brother. Maybe I should call you senior brother now. Now you, Wang Xingxiao and Gu Hanshan have all lost contact, and all our forces are looking for you. My Shiranui made a big noise this time and I got the news, so I came to have a look. Based on the analysis of the route, it's very likely that they are besieging you. As for Wang Xingxiao and Gu Hanshan, I've seen them many times and they're nothing special. It's more interesting to come to you." Jiang Shangyu walked on the mountain road and said casually with a smile. Li Tianlan nodded and looked a little relaxed, but the way he addressed him did not change at all. "So, senior brother Jiang has got in touch with Tribulation Master and sent my message back?" Under the night sky, Jiang Shangyu's body suddenly stopped. The gradually heavy rain pattered on the hillside, and it was so dark that Jiang Shangyu's body stood there for nearly 2 minutes, and then he said in a deep voice, "Send it back." His tone was slow and slower, and his strange soft voice floated in the night wind, getting farther and farther away. "Not yet." Li Tianlan suddenly stopped. He looked at Jiang Shangyu quietly and his eyes gradually narrowed. Chapter 158. A 6,000-word chapter. There's another chapter in the evening. In a sense, Li Tianlan, who came to the prosperous world outside from the primeval forest on the border, didn't trust anyone at all. It couldn't be said that he was suspicious by nature. It could only be said that he was vigilant, suspicious, and distrustful of the whole world. Whether it was good or bad, he had an almost instinctive vigilance. Except for the woman whose every move was full of deep affection, the woman who could not wait to hand over her soul, and the little woman who gave him her most precious chastity except for her. Because Li Tianlan had never thought of trusting others without reservation. When Jiang Shangyu first appeared, Li Tianlan's almost instinctive vigilance told him that it was almost impossible for them to be friends. For this young master of Zhou state who suddenly and strangely appeared beside him and saved him in disguise, Li Tianlan had been on guard from beginning to end. Countless examples in the dark world had proved that people who saved people might not have good intentions. In many cases, behind the ill-intentioned kindness, there was often the most deadly trap. He had never met Jiang Shangyu before. It was impossible for Li Tianlan to believe that Jiang Shangyu risked his life to save him today out of the so-called compatriot love. And Jiang Shangyu's answer seemed to prove the importance of his vigilance. He had arrived in Changdao for several hours, but no one from Zhou state came to meet him except Jiang Shangyu. It could be seen that this encirclement and suppression was obviously not as well known as Jiang Shangyu said. At least the official channel of Zhou state had not received the relevant news yet. Jiang Shangyu knew his whereabouts but did not get in touch with Tribulation by Yuming and others who were still in Dongdu. Li Tianlan would never think that Jiang Shangyu was also out of touch with Dongdu and deliberately concealed it. It seemed to be the only explanation. From this point of view, now that he was in contact with Jiang Shangyu, whether it was Tribulation, Gu Yunxiao or Yi Fengqing, it meant that the people of the three superpowers had not received the news. In other words, after a short contact between the two, even if one of them had an accident or even died, at least on the surface, it had nothing to do with the other. As for the truth behind the surface, he was in a foreign country and was in the wilderness. Even if Zhou state wanted to investigate, it was somewhat powerless. Li Tianlan quietly stood where he was and looked at Jiang Shangyu. Jiang Shangyu was also looking at Li Tianlan thoughtfully. Both of their gazes were equally calm, but the former's eyes were filled with indifference, while the latter's eyes were filled with a deathly stillness. Both sides stared at each other for a full 2 minutes. No one spoke, no one moved. The subtle and sensitive atmosphere was so oppressive that it was almost impossible to breathe. The night rain poured down. The dagger was revealed. Senior brother Li, you misunderstood me. After a long time, Jiang Shangyu narrowed his eyes slightly and smiled gently. His expression was sincere, but there was no sincerity in his explanation. The reason why I didn't get in touch with them was that I wasn't sure if it was really you here, so, he shrugged. Since we found senior brother Li, the next step is to get in touch with our main force in the eastern capital. Li Tianlan nodded, but his body remained motionless. Jiang Shangyu didn't move either. The heavy rain soaked their bodies. Although Jiang Shangyu said that he would contact them, he didn't take any actual action. He still looked thoughtful and said calmly, Senior brother Li seems to be badly injured? Yes, it's very serious. Li Tianlan was expressionless and said dryly. He seemed to be relaxed, but no one could find the slightest flaw. Jiang Shangyu was very scary. Li Tianlan could even clearly feel the almost unfathomable elusiveness of him. As a young expert in Zhengzhou state who was second only to Gu Hanshan and Wang Xingxiao, Jiang Shangyu, who was already 23 years old, was only in the fire-flaming realm and hadn't even reached the stabilization phase. Dongqing Rushi, one of the top 10 experts of the young generation, was in a higher realm than Jiang Shangyu, which was enough to explain too many problems. Jiang Shangyu, who had the exquisite bone, didn't have the wind and thunder veins or the heavenly king heart. Although the so-called constitution was important, it was often not the final factor that determined a person's achievements. For example, his grandfather Li Honghe Wang Tianzong, who ranked first on the divine list, and even Gu Xingyun and the master of Samsara Palace didn't even have the relatively weak exquisite bone. But any invincible realm expert with the wind and thunder veins dared not say anything harsh in front of them. To some extent, Jiang Shangyu could barely be regarded as a figure without a top constitution, but his combat capability was beyond most people's imagination. The exquisite bone was rare, but compared with the wind and thunder veins and the heavenly king heart, it was still inferior. But Li Tianlan was fearless. They were both in the fire-flaming realm and even in the same small realm. Even if he was seriously injured now, he had nothing to fear in the face of Jiang Shangyu. In the dark night, Jiang Shangyu's silent eyes gradually became bright and sharp. The inexplicable light flickered in his eyes, faster and faster. The night rain was majestic. In the silence, Jiang Shangyu's increasingly bright and sharp eyes gradually became calm again, and all the light seemed to be slowly extinguished. I've always been a very cautious person. In the darkness, Jiang Shangyu suddenly spoke in a soft and calm tone. With a touch of self-mockery he said, "This can even be said to be my biggest weakness. So since I was a child, I don't know how many times I've been fooled. Many times I also think that the other party is bluffing, but I dare not take risks. Others may take a risk when they are 30% sure, but if I am not 70% sure, I would rather give up the opportunity. Senior brother Li, do you think this is a sign of extreme lack of confidence?" Caution and lack of confidence are two different things. Li Tianlan looked at the young master in front of him who he could not figure out and said seriously, "How sure are you now?" "Originally I was 70% sure. But now I only have half of it." Jiang Shangyu took a deep breath in the darkness and asked in the same serious tone, "Such a good opportunity, I really don't want to miss it. Senior brother Li, if I try my best, can I kill you?" Frank, indifferent, without covering up or disdain to cover up. This could be said to be really straight to the point. Well, Li Tianlan also did not hesitate and replied faintly, "You will die." He didn't say much, but between the lines, all of them were full of confidence and coldness. Jiang Shangyu smiled. He took a deep look at Li Tianlan and said slowly, "You don't seem to know my specific combat capability." "I don't need to know." Li Tianlan said calmly, "I only need to know my own combat capability." Jiang Shangyu's laughter stopped. Even a fool would be able to tell how firm his confidence was in those words. Fearless? Makes sense. He nodded and suddenly said, "I've seen Wang Xingxiao and Gu Hanshan, but in my opinion senior brother Li should be the most heavenly son. I'm not flattering you. Wang Xingxiao and Gu Hanshan are not weak, but compared with you they seem to lack a trace of madness and cruelty. But you're different. I don't know what you've endured before, but just from tonight I can see that you're very calm, but you're a calm madman, a madman who can ignore everything. You're cruel to others and also to yourself. You don't like nonsense and you're vindictive. It seems that you instinctively don't want to tolerate anyone else's disrespect to you. Isn't this also a kind of extreme arrogance? Senior brother Li, Do you think what I said is right? Li Tianlan didn't say a word. Jiang Shangyu's voice gradually became dangerous. So you've revealed a flaw. A person like you, if you grow up to the peak, will definitely be a hero of the generation. If you really have the strength to kill me here, you won't tolerate my killing intent to you at all. This time you're really bluffing, aren't you? In the darkness, he laughed happily. Senior brother Li, now I'm 90% sure. Silence. A short and oppressive silence. Jiang Shangyu narrowed his eyes and spread his killing intent, waiting for Li Tianlan's reaction. It was quiet. The darkness of the night did not change, but Li Tianlan's figure seemed to suddenly disappear completely. Darkness pervaded everything. Li Tianlan's figure seemed to have completely integrated with the darkness. His body directly disappeared from Jiang Shangyu's sight and perception. Only a sense of danger like a tide exploded in an instant under the curtain of rain. The breath of death intertwined in the darkness. Jiang Shangyu's hair stood on end and his heart sank, but he remained calm on the surface. Senior brother Li, you're too sensitive, aren't you? He laughed softly and his tone became softer. Li Tianlan had almost completely turned into darkness. His voice sounded and spread in all directions. Make your move. Make his move. How could he make a move if he couldn't lock on? The unique skill of the invincible manual of the map of God of War, Night Walking. The night walking skill in the map of God of War could be said to be the general outline of the unique skill of body movement in Zhuanyuantai. The desperate chase of Sai City, Li Tianlan's wind bearing, and the shadow formula of tribulation could all be said to be the evolved version of the night walking skill. Night walking was similar to the shadow formula. To some extent, it could be said to be the upgraded version of the night walking skill. It was harsher than the night walking skill but more unpredictable. Night walking plus the shadow formula. Among the younger generation of Zhongzhou state in terms of body movements alone, Li Tianlan was the well-deserved number one, second to none. The killing intent condensed in the air. Li Tianlan hid in the dark and a thunderous blow was about to fall. Jiang Shangyu sat down directly on the spot and chuckled. How about just taking it as a beautiful misunderstanding? He took out his mobile phone and shook it in the air. Senior brother Li, I can give you my mobile phone. You can contact the person you want to contact at any time. The killing intent gradually disappeared, but it didn't dissipate. It was hidden. In the darkness, Li Tianlan's figure appeared behind Jiang Shangyu. I'm very strange, he said in a flat tone. You and I have never met. Senior brother Jiang, can you tell me how I offended you and made you want to kill me? Jiang Shangyu was silent for a moment. However, this person was too frank. Either he didn't say it or once he opened his mouth he gave people the feeling that he was telling the truth. You can understand it as a master doing it for a woman. My most beloved woman. The corner of Li Tianlan's mouth twitched and his expression was strange. Your beloved woman? Wei Bai. Jiang Shangyu said it in silence. He seemed to be a little stunned and it took him a few seconds to react. He couldn't help but smile bitterly. You mean Goddess Qin? Among all the young people in Zhongzhou state, I guess you're the only one who can call her Wei Bai with confidence. I'm not talking about her. The goddess is high above. Even if she is willing to descend to the human world, it's not something a mortal like me can hope for. At least I know that there are several superiors of the invincible realm who have just entered the peak period who admire Goddess Qin, or people with frightening backgrounds like Wang Xiaoyao. Compared with them I'm nothing. Not Qin Wei Bai. Li Tianlan frowned and said in a low voice, so it's Wang Yuetong? I've only met the little princess once. Although I'm vulgar, I won't fall in love at first sight with such a small probability. Jiang Shangyu shook his head again. Not Qin Wei Bai, not Wang Yuetong. They were the two women who had the closest relationship with Li Tianlan now. If not them, why did Jiang Shangyu want to kill him? He was in the Deep Sea Academy. No, the Deep Sea Academy? Li Tianlan opened his eyes subconsciously and finally remembered a woman who was likely to have a close relationship with him, his fiancée. Do you like Dongqing Rushi? Jiang Shangyu, Dongqing Rushi. Among the top 10 experts of the young generation, one ranked second and the other ranked third. If the two of them were together it might be a good story, right? Junior sister Dongqing, you're too arrogant. I can't control you. Jiang Shangyu sighed with a sad face and there was not much love in his tone. He looked at Li Tianlan with a strange look in his eyes. Seems that we were all wrong. We thought the reason why you had a relationship with the Dongqing clan was because of Ning Qianqing. Now it seems that it was because of junior sister Dongqing? The engagement many years ago. Who the hell are you? But it's hard to say. Maybe the Dongqing clan got in touch with you through Ning Qianqing, saw your potential and planned to marry junior sister Dongqing to you? They have a good eye, but isn't the Dongqing clan afraid that goddess Qin will be angry and jealous? It seems that the engagement is easier to be accepted. Li Tianlong, who realized that he had accidentally let the cat out of the bag, was silent for a while, and then said faintly, "None of these three people." "Oh. Then who can it be? I don't have a relationship with other women." Jiang Shangyu smiled and took a deep look at Li Tianlong. He suddenly asked, "Do you know what Kunlun City is? Do you know what Phoenix Pavilion is?" Li Tianlong had heard of Kunlun City. But the so-called Phoenix Pavilion. Is Phoenix Pavilion a subordinate agency of Kunlun City? Li Tianlong suddenly asked. Jiang Shangyu didn't say more. He just silently handed the phone to Li Tianlong, looking a little dispirited. Li Tianlong glanced at him and took the phone. Suppressing the doubts in his heart, he instinctively wanted to call Qin Weibai. But as soon as he pressed the familiar number, the longing in his heart surged like a flash flood. It was 4:30 in the night. In Huating, it should be close to 6 in the morning. He hesitated, found the communication software directly with Jiang Shangyu's phone, logged in and then sent a video call directly. Jiang Shangyu stood up gracefully and walked away. As always, the video call was connected as soon as possible. It was as if he had been waiting for the video for 24 hours. The perfect face that appeared in his mind from time to time even when he was on the run appeared on the screen of the phone. It was as beautiful as a painting. "Tianlong, where are you now?" As soon as the video stabilized, Qin Weibai's voice sounded directly. She was not in a hurry but with a sense of relief. She smiled and said softly, "I heard that you lost contact with Tribulation and others. I was going to fly directly to East Island in the afternoon. Now, it's good that you're okay." "Okay." Li Tianlong smiled. The darkness covered his pale face. His tone was soft and peaceful. "I got into some trouble in Ninghu and was chased to Changdao. I killed some people and just escaped." "Changdao?" Qin Weibai whispered to herself and looked at Li Tianlong. "Are you really okay?" "I'm okay." Li Tianlong shook his head. "The Kusanagi force shouldn't be so weak." Li Tianlong looked helpless. "Do you want to say that I'm weak?" "Ah." Qin Weibai chuckled and said with unparalleled elegance, "I don't mean that. The people of the Kusanagi force have been transformed and are almost not human anymore. I heard that you met them and took Dubian Xiangyuan hostage. Honey, how did you do it?" Her soft voice made Li Tianlong feel comfortable. He chuckled and said, "I was lucky. Otherwise there would be some trouble. The Kusanagi force seems to need to replenish energy. At that time it was just awakened and there was not enough energy. I accidentally cut off the power. No matter how strong the Kusanagi force is, it's useless without energy. I wanted to take one of them back but I encountered some accidents so I failed. But Dubian Xiangyuan is with me now and Shitin Mingzi, the daughter of Shitin Financial Group. I know what happened to Shitin Financial Group. Saint has gone to East Island to deal with Shitin Financial Group." Qin Weibai chuckled and said, "Dubian Xiangyuan, do you want to use it for yourself? Are you going to build your own super force?" Li Tianlong nodded. He was not surprised that Qin Weibai knew him so well. "I see." Qin Weibai nodded. "Samsara also has this technology at present, but it's not mature yet. I will put Dubian Xiangyuan in a base in Africa. This base will be separated from Samsara and belong to both of us." Li Tianlong hesitated slightly and said softly, "Your Highness, Palace Master." He knew Qin Weibai's status in Samsara Palace, but what she did was more or less suspected of using her power for personal gain. "It's okay." Qin Weibai said in a clear voice, "I'll tell my sister later." Li Tianlong nodded and looked at the date on his phone. June 15th. This was the day of the final battle between the master of Samsara Palace and the governor of Kunlun City. Even though he knew in advance that the process of this battle would not be too dangerous, he still couldn't help asking, "Is there any problem with today's battle?" "No problem." Qin Weibai said obediently, "Zhongzhou State has coordinated with Samsara Palace. For Samsara, this battle is a declaration of strength and Gu Xingyun is the best sparring partner." "Sparring partner?" Li Tianlong smiled bitterly and shook his head. In the distance, a little fire lit up and gradually approached. Zhang Shangyu walked over slowly. Li Tianlan, who also realized that it was not a good place to stay, suddenly said, "Little Bai, there's something. Help me check it out." "Well," Qin Weibai's tone was a little sweet. "Help me check what kind of institution Phoenix Pavilion is. If it's not easy to check, then forget it." Li Tianlan said slowly. "Phoenix Pavilion?" Qin Weibai's expression changed abruptly, and she subconsciously raised her voice. A trace of extreme pain flashed through her eyes. She tightly pursed her pink lips, and her expression was complicated. "How do you know the name of this organization?" she asked. "How do you know the name of this organization?" "I'm with Zhang Shangyu now," Li Tianlan said with a bitter smile. "The phone that contacts you now is also his." "Zhang Shangyu, the son of Zhang Shan?" Qin Weibai said thoughtfully and nodded slightly. For the first time since they met, she disobeyed Li Tianlan's will and ignored the sensitive word Phoenix Pavilion intentionally or unintentionally. She said seriously, "Tianlan, this person is very scary. You should pay more attention to him. At least according to my observation, although Zhang Shangyu doesn't have the title of Young Heavenly Son, he is not much weaker than Gu Han's Han. If the two are in the same realm, he is definitely not worse than Gu Han's Han." "I feel the same. It's really scary." Li Tianlan nodded. "But he is also a genius with exquisite bone. It's acceptable to be a little bit against the natural order." "Exquisite bone," Qin Weibai thought for a while and did not speak. "Well, he's coming. I'll change my phone and contact you again." Zhang Shangyu's figure gradually approached. Li Tianlan stood up and was ready to hang up the video. On the screen, Qin Weibai wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Finally, she smiled gently and said yes. "Finished." Zhang Shangyu came over and chuckled. "Finished." Li Tianlan nodded and hung up the video call. He subconsciously wanted to log out of his account. The moment he was about to log out, a message from Qin Weibai appeared directly on the screen. There were only 5 simple words. It was very ordinary, but it made Li Tianlan's pupils shrink to the limit in an instant. "Give me back my phone. We should go. Let's get out of here first," Zhang Shangyu said casually. Li Tianlan handed the phone to Zhang Shangyu. His face was calm, but his emotions were fluctuating violently inside. The message from Qin Weibai was clear and straightforward, but it explained a fact very thoroughly. Chapter 159. It's another chapter of nearly 6,000 words, so I'm a little late. The early summer was long. When he hung up the video call, the light of dawn was already blooming on the horizon. The morning sun had just risen. The cold morning light sprinkled on the water where the river and the sea met, falling on every corner of the Sky Academy. The Special Warfare Academy, which was full of an iron-blooded atmosphere, was half hidden by lush plants. Standing on the top floor of the dormitory building, one could see that the entire Sky Academy was less solemn and cold than it used to be and more tranquil. June 15th. The day of the final battle. The entire Sky Academy and the entire Dark World were waiting for the result of this battle. In the vast Dark World, the superiors of the Invincible Realm were far from numerous, but they were not rare either. There were 30 superiors of the Invincible Realm on the Divine and Holy lists, and there were also individuals like Gu Qianchuan who had not been on the list. There were dozens of superiors of the Invincible Realm among the nearly 7 billion people in the world, which was a pitifully small number. And even the superiors of the Invincible Realm were divided into the strong and the weak. The gap between the first place on the Divine list and the last place on the Holy list could also be jaw-dropping. On the Divine list, which represented the peak combat capability of the Dark World, those who could rank in the top 5 were well-deserved gods for this era. For example, the Sword Emperor of Zhengzhou State, Wang Tianzong. For example, the Saint War Angel of the Vatican, Arsis. Another example was Gu Xingyun, the god of war of Zhengzhou State, who ranked 4th on the Divine list. The list of the Divine and Holy lists was updated every 10 years. Every ranking, every change, rise or fall, was a major event that could affect the pattern of the Dark World. The list of individual advancement and retreat represented whether a super trend was compromising or radical on a series of things, and even related to the rise and fall and survival of a superforce. This was the fight at the peak of the entire Dark World, and it was a terrifying deterrent that only belonged to the superiors of the Invincible Realm. Anything in the Dark World, as long as it was related to the superiors of the Divine list, would attract more attention than the war between some small countries. and it was inevitable that the final battle between two superiors of the divine list would attract the attention of the whole world. The master of Samsara Palace fought against the god of war of Zhongzhou state. After Night Spirit was destroyed and Tian Exen, who held a murderous weapon, was killed with a single strike, the entire Dark World took the mysterious palace master's strength seriously. That terrifying strike could shatter heaven and earth. In terms of power alone, it could definitely be ranked in the top 5 of the divine list. Therefore, today's battle was not only a battle between two invincible realm experts on the divine list, but also a battle between the top 5 in the Dark World. Was it a new god? Or the fall of the invincible realm? Everything would be revealed today. Qin Weibai sat quietly in front of the delicate but old dressing table, combing her long hair in a natural and calm manner. The phone was placed aside and the screen was not completely dark yet. In the faint light, the photo of a young man and a woman snuggling together was reflected in her eyes. The corners of her mouth rose slightly, and her whole person revealed a trace of joy from the bottom of her heart. She hummed like the sounds of nature in the bedroom. It was cold and gentle, and the unknown song filled every corner of the bedroom. There were songs but no lyrics, and the melodious tone was full of melancholy and melancholy. The lipstick was evenly smeared on her pink and slightly pale red lips. She gently pressed her lips together, and the dark red color, even a little scarlet like blood, naturally appeared at the corners of her mouth. There was no extra embellishment. Qin Weibai simply smeared the lipstick, stood up, took off her pajamas and put on a long dress that was also almost scarlet. All the coldness and holiness seemed to completely fade away in an instant. Red dress, red lips. Flawless. The corners of her eyes rose slightly, and suddenly there was a trace of enchantment and coldness flying out from the inside out. At this moment Qin Weibai was still devastatingly beautiful, but unlike the noble and cold in the past, her every move seemed to have a kind of flustered charm. In a sense, in front of Qingyun Temple in Lin, and what Taoist priest Xianxia, the great master of metaphysics, said was actually not wrong. She was a siren. Also enough to bring disaster to a country. Bring disaster to a country and people. Qin Weibai stood quietly in front of the mirror, looking at herself in the mirror, and her eyes were dazed and strange. Such a dress. It was really a long time since she had seen it. She smiled softly and tidied her long hair. The beautiful black hair fell softly on her shoulders, and the long hair reached her waist, shiny and bright. What was seductive behavior? What was charming the common people? Just like the current Qin Weibai, every move of hers was natural. There was a slight knock on the door. The door is unlocked. Qin Weibai stood in front of the mirror and said calmly. There was a slight pause outside the door, and then the door was gently pushed open. A white woman nearly 1.9 meters tall came in with a tray. The woman looked like she was in her 30s, but her figure was not fat. She was plump and sexy, and her long brown hair was tied up, making her look extremely capable. Her appearance was relatively ordinary among Westerners, but she had a mature temperament, and her whole body was full of the exotic charm of a mature woman. The woman walked in with her head down, holding the tray. The food on the tray was simple and rich. A glass of hot milk, a fried egg, and a glass of warm water. There was also a small but exquisite fruit plate, which was cut into pieces of kiwi, dragon fruit, bananas, apples, a few grapes, and small oranges. All kinds of fruits were mixed together, which looked very pleasing. This was Qin Weibai's breakfast every day. The woman held the tray and whispered, "Boss, your breakfast, I..." While speaking, she raised her head. The moment she saw Qin Weibai, she suddenly stopped talking. In her sight, Qin Weibai, dressed in red, stood quietly in front of the mirror, motionless. The loose red dress covered her slim and exquisite figure. She pursed her lips, and her body was as still as a statue. But at this time she exuded a kind of enchanting charm that almost suffocated other women. Ghost? Angel? The tall white woman's mind was blank. She thought for a long time and finally seemed to find an accurate word in the Chinese language that she was not very proficient in. Demon. At this moment Qin Weibai was full of demon aura, so enchanting that it made people's scalps numb. "Shadowless, am I beautiful?" Qin Weibai asked without looking back. Shadowless, one of the 12 super masters of Samsara. After Horsewoman and Flaming Fire all went to East Island, Shadowless temporarily took over Flaming Fire's work and became Qin Weibai's guardian. In the whole samsara, this was a very special position. Shadowless seemed to want to do this job well, so her every move was careful and respectful, almost pious, like the most loyal servant. Hearing Qin Weibai's question, she almost bowed slightly without thinking, and her tone was full of sincere admiration without any falsehood. Of course, the boss is the most beautiful. This was the real truth, and it was irrefutable. Qin Weibai smiled softly. In the majestic demon aura, Shadowless vaguely felt that the boss's smile was a little sad and lonely. Tianlong won't like me like this. Shadowless lowered her head and didn't say anything. For Li Tianlong, each of the 12 supermasters of samsara had very complicated feelings. They didn't hate or like him, but it was a very special feeling. The boss always hated it when other people disturbed her feelings, so for Li Tianlong, every supermaster instinctively kept silent. Even if they commented, it was basically good. They didn't talk about how Li Tianlong was in their hearts, but at least in their mouths he was truly unparalleled in the world. The boss hated meaningless flattery the most, but this was the only exception. No matter how much they praised Li Tianlong, the boss just smiled happily, deeply in love, and smiled like a satisfied child. This is the last time, Qin Weibai said slowly. She took a deep look at herself in the mirror, then suddenly turned around. It's like a farewell. I won't have breakfast. As she spoke, her slender and beautiful figure directly walked out of the door. Shadowless froze for a moment, then put the tray aside and hurried to follow. Tianlong is in Changdao now. He just contacted me. I can feel that he was the first one to contact me. It seems that he's fine. Qin Weibai seemed to be in a good mood. At least she didn't show any nervousness about the coming battle. Young Master Li is unparalleled and talented. East Island is just a small place, and the 2 invincible realm experts are trapped in the Sky Academy. With young Master Li's strength, he can completely sweep the whole East Island. Boss, don't worry. Shadowless followed Qin Weibai, saying things that could make her get goosebumps when she thought about it. But her expression was natural, even with a trace of admiration. The master of Samsara Palace was mysterious and kept silent all year round. Most of the things in Samsara Palace were handled by Qin Weibai. The 12 supermasters represented power in the outside world. But when it came to each of them, they were mysterious, ruthless, bloodthirsty, crazy, neurotic, aloof, and so on. But when they were around Qin Weibai, they didn't have any moral integrity at all. As long as the boss was happy, they could do anything. Even if the boss said that Li Tianlong could destroy the earth with one sword move, the 12 supermasters would only nod and agree. A smile flashed across Qin Weibai's lips. She said softly, although he's fine, I can feel that he's under pressure. He must have had a hard time these days when we lost contact. But, she paused. But he'll be fine soon. After today, there will be a lot of people in East Island to help him share the pressure. Shadowless nodded. She was about to say something like volunteering to show her loyalty. But before she could speak, an old voice sounded in front of her. Boss Qin. The 2 went downstairs and walked out of the unit door of the dormitory area. Zhuang Huayang, the headmaster of the Sky Academy, seemed to have been waiting here. Seeing Qin Weibai coming out, he took the initiative to step forward and say hello. Good morning, headmaster. Qin Weibai's tone was calm. The morning sun gradually rose. There were less than 2 hours before the final battle. It wasn't a long time, but it was enough for the 2 sides who had a tacit understanding to make a pre-battle plan. I just visited Her Highness Palace Master. Zhuang Huayang said with a wry smile. It's a pity that I didn't see her. What does Samsara think of this battle? The master of Samsara Palace appeared in the Sky Academy 2 days ago. The moment she entered the Sky Academy, she chose to do closed-door training. Even a director of the decision-making committee visited her in person, but she didn't see her. Regarding this final battle, she completely gave the initiative to Qin Weibai and trusted her without any reservation. We've discussed it before. There's no need to continue, right? Qin Weibai said calmly. This battle is imperative. Maybe it doesn't have to be a life-or-death battle, but we all hope that His Highness Gu Xingyun can do his best. Samsara has been longing for this battle for a long time. I believe that this battle will not let anyone down. It had to be done. Go all out. Zhuang Huayang frowned slightly. He wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. He hesitated several times and finally said, Boss Qin, I don't quite understand. This is a setup. To put it bluntly, It doesn't matter whether this battle continues or not. I don't quite understand why you and the palace master insist on it. Even if it's just for show, we can understand. Zhou state will also strive for the best result for Her Highness Palace Master. But no. There's no need for show. Qin Weibai interrupted Zhuang Huayang. What Samsara needs is a real battle, a battle that will convince everyone. The headmaster only needs to pass my words to Gu Xingyun. I can represent the will of the entire Samsara palace. Zhuang Huayang frowned. He took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, Reason? Boss Qin, I need a reason. Why is His Highness so obsessed with this battle? Qin Weibai took a deep look at Zhuang Huayang and said calmly, Because of me. Or because of Tianlan. She walked along the stone path of the Sky Academy and said calmly, In East Island, Tianlan has killed several superiors of the Thunder-Shocking Realm and more superiors of the Fire-Flaming Realm. There were more Fire-Flaming Realm experts. The headmaster should be very clear about what this meant. East Emperor Palace is only a department-level establishment, and the plot of East Island is still going on. Why don't we guess what level East Emperor Palace will be when Tianlan comes back from East Island? Zhuang Huayang thought about it seriously for nearly half a minute. He vaguely seemed to understand what Qin Weibai meant, and his face changed slightly. You want to? No, the time is not ripe. At least Samsara should have a certain position in Zhou state. The time is ripe enough. Qin Weibai's tone was indifferent. She was dressed in red and looked unparalleled, but there was a kind of unfathomable light flowing in her eyes like the abyss and the sea. The foundation of Samsara is not in Zhou state. It doesn't matter whether we fight for some superficial things or not. Tianlan's performance is getting better and better, so I have to give him a title similar to his strength. After today's battle, there is no need to hide Tianlan's identity. She raised her head and looked straight at the not dazzling morning light on the horizon. She was relaxed. The sun shone on her, and her red dress seemed to be dyed with a layer of gold. She stood in the rising sun, and her whole body was shining with a kind of poignant and dazzling light. Some things, some unique skills, and some people. It's time to surface. She murmured to herself, everything starts today. On the other side of the residential area, a few small but important teams in the Dark World walked out of the corridor and went straight to the #1 training ground. Yi Wuji walked at the end with Feng and Snow Girl, 2 Thunder-Shocking Realm experts. Luxing Zhangquan, the sect master of Jifeng Sword Raining School in East Island, seemed to be walking with the wind, elegant and unrestrained. Jiang Qianyan, the second master of the Jiang family of South America, looked at Qin Weibai in a red dress. After a slight shock, his eyes became more and more fiery. 7 o'clock in the morning. There was still an hour before the final battle. The spectators from the superpowers in the Dark World had begun to enter the venue in advance. Under the bright sunshine. On the #3 platform of the #1 training ground. Gu Xingyun had been waiting there 1 step earlier. He stood motionless on the side of the platform with his eyes closed. He seemed to be integrated with heaven and earth. He wore a robe unique to Zhou state and stepped on the ground barefoot. His momentum kept rising. The fighting intent of Chong Xiao broke through and kept fluctuating in the #1 training ground. The spectators sat below the platform and looked at Gu Xingyun on the platform with awe-inspiring expressions. At this moment, the governor of Kunlun City had become the real god of war of Zhou state. The overwhelming fighting intent was constantly accumulating and surging, and there was a kind of invincible momentum. Time passed slowly. The aura of Gu Xingyun became more and more terrifying and gradually spread to the whole venue. The hands of the clock quietly pointed to 8 o'clock. All the spectators straightened up subconsciously. A figure in a black cloak suddenly stood on the high platform in the midst of the battle intent that permeated the entire arena. Almost no one noticed it. It seemed to appear out of thin air without any warning. In the crazy momentum of Gu Xingyun, who was almost integrated with heaven and earth, she stood quietly in front of him. The wind in the air blew over. But her wide cloak didn't flutter at all. The venue was silent. This could be said to be the peak battle of the highest level in the Dark World in recent years. Everyone opened their eyes wide and refused to miss any detail. In front of Gu Xingyun, the master of Samsara Palace, who was covered in a black cloak, took a step forward. Some things have been too long ago. I'm afraid that you will forget them. I'm afraid that I will forget them. I'm afraid that the Dark World will forget them. She opened her mouth softly and her voice spread to the whole venue. So, it's best to remind all of us with today's battle. I don't understand what you mean. Gu Xingyun narrowed his eyes slightly and said in a soft voice. From the bottom of his heart he naturally didn't want this dispensable battle to happen. But the master of Samsara Palace insisted on fighting a few days ago. In this case he had no reason to shrink back. He was the god of war of Xianxia state and one of the strongest gods in the entire dark world. In the face of any opponent he had no reason to shrink back or be afraid. In his sight, the master of Samsara Palace moved forward again. That's all the more reason to remind you. In case you really forget. She said softly and reached out her hand to pull something in the air. The whole air seemed to be torn in an instant and the airflow was running wildly. As the master of Samsara Palace pulled, a sword seemed to be pulled out of the void. In the early morning of June. On the training ground the temperature dropped instantly. A long sword condensed from ice was held in the master of Samsara Palace's hand. The whole venue seemed to turn from early summer to late winter in an instant. The biting cold air suddenly appeared and the temperature dropped rapidly. A large area of the sky suddenly became gloomy. The master of Samsara Palace held the sword with one hand. The sharp sword intent that could tear everything instantly burst out of her body. The morning sun never disappeared. It began to rain in the air. The rain turned into ice. The surrounding air continued to drop. Gu Xingyun, who had been extremely calm, suddenly became gloomy. The familiar and strange sword intent covered everything, and almost instantly evoked the most unforgettable memory that he didn't want to recall. Familiar? You can't forget it for 20 years. The master of Samsara Palace took the third step. Her eyes stared at Gu Xingyun's face through the cloak. This sword move is called the fifth blade. The 24 moves of sword, the ultimate unique skill of Zhuanyuantai of Kunlun. The fifth blade flying snow. The ice rain in the air mixed with the sword intent fell instantly. The rain cut through the air in the air and a vacuum state appeared one after another. The air was completely chaotic. The crazy sword intent rushed up to the sky. The fourth step was taken. It's snowing. Under the platform an abrupt voice suddenly sounded. Under the gloomy sky, countless snowflakes fell at the same time without any warning. The snowflakes were white and clear, holy and flawless. The cold sword intent covered the sky and the earth. The killing intent was like the sea rushing and roaring. The master of Samsara Palace held the sword with one hand and took the fourth step. The woman was mighty. Flying snow in June. Chapter 160. I wanted to write a big chapter of more than 10,000 words, but I can't finish it. I've written part of the second chapter. I'll post it as soon as I finish it. It won't delay tomorrow's update. The Gu family? Sounds powerful and bold. Who can tell me what the Gu family is? Ah, I remember. I met your father once. He was at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. It was amazing. He called me martial uncle. What about you? Shouldn't you call me something nice as well? I don't deserve anything. Is it enough that my family name is Li? Did I make you lose face in front of your beloved woman? I'm sorry. My name is Kuangdi. You can tell that I'm not a good-tempered person. I'm a little uncultured. My good grandson, don't blame me. This was the first time they met many years ago. Hey, your woman is good. I**ck her. No, I've seen her before. You look familiar. What's your name? Gu Xingyun. Oh, we are in different generations. How are your grandfather and father? Last time they sent someone to kill me. Tut, almost. Just a little bit. Too careless. Oh, you didn't do it? Your whole family has explained it to my father. It's meaningless to say it again. Do you need me to throw the evidence in your faces? I'm in a good mood today. You kowtow to me and I'll let it go. Young and frivolous. In his memory he seemed to be a figure who seemed to be cynical and careless at all times. Under the arrogant and domineering appearance he could hit the nail on the head. He was warm, mean, talented and the future god of war of Xianxia state. You can't take it after only 3 moves? I still have a lot of swords. Do you want to take them? The Gu family is really getting worse. In 3 years you have assassinated 6 times. Can't you stand it? In fact, even if I die, so what? The Gu family has no successor. It can't change anything. I'm in the invincible realm. Wait for me. Let your father and the others wait. In his memory it seemed to be his first failure. From beginning to end he was defeated in 3 moves. At that time he didn't feel humiliated when he looked at the figure that looked down on him. Perhaps with the passage of time, the frivolity of the other party had become mild, or perhaps it was due to other reasons, but he did not feel angry at that time. However, the way the people around him looked at him as if it was a matter of course stung his nerves and made him feel extremely embarrassed. At that time he felt that he was a joke, a clown. Even though the Gu clan had always been like this. The legend of Qin? Interesting. But was this enough? With just you guys. I don't want to die. Who can kill me? Just you. 1, 2, 3. Had just you and these ants, do you think you can kill me? Sinner. Traitor should be executed. Is this what you want? Is that what you want? It really hurts. My entire life. My surname is Gu after all. I really want to see her. The curtain of glory fell and the era changed. Hundreds of years of glory was completely destroyed in the heavy rain. Time flew by and spring and summer came and went. Spring breeze. Summer, autumn leaves, flying snow. Year after year the memory of the past faded, the sword intent of the past dissipated, the glory was covered with dust and the glory was spurned. Only he was thriving. The sun was shining above his head and everything seemed to have disappeared. This was the era that belonged to him. After many years he was now the god of war of Xianxia state, and the unbearable memory seemed to have completely disappeared. Until this moment the clear sky suddenly became gloomy and the world was snowing. The familiar and strange sword intent surged violently, as if it would shatter heaven and earth. The scenes that he thought he had forgotten began to emerge in his mind bit by bit, becoming clearer and clearer. Gu Xingyun finally realized that those memories that he thought he had forgotten actually still existed, and the shadow that once hung over his head had not disappeared either. Zhuanyuantai of Kunlun, the Li family, the 24 moves of sword and the 5th blade. It was snowing in June. Did this sword move want to tell the world something? A huge and strong anger instantly occupied Gu Xingyun's consciousness. His expression became gloomy, and his eyes suddenly became distorted in a very short time. The master of Samsara Palace in front of him was a remnant of the Li family? How could he not have heard of a female invincible realm expert? Who was this person? No matter who she was, he would not allow anyone else to touch the sensitive case of that year. Absolute. Well. Touching the wall of memory, everything in the past came to his heart. In a strong rage, Gu Xingyun directly became crazy. He was like a dragon whose reverse scale had been touched. At this moment, all interests and compromises had disappeared in his heart. The 5th blade flying snow. Under the sky in June, the temperature of the number 1 training ground plummeted. The dense snowflakes were like a white sky curtain, covering the ground neatly and densely. The sword energy was rising. The snowflakes were falling. You want to fight? Then fight. The master of Samsara Palace took the 5th step. Her aura suddenly rose to the extreme along with her sword intent. She was originally a tall, plump and even slightly chubby figure. She was not ugly, but she could not be considered to be extremely beautiful either. However, at this moment, her every move revealed a piercingly cold and dignified aura that was like that of a fiend god. She was unparalleled. Gu Xingyun suddenly rushed forward. He changed from small steps to big steps. He charged, jumped and soared into the air. His body disappeared in everyone's sight, getting higher and higher, as if he was going to the sky step by step. There was no unusual phenomenon around him. Or in other words, he himself was an unusual phenomenon. He turned into a sword. The long roar spread in the Sky Academy. At this moment, Gu Xingyun completely took off his elegant and light coat, and his whole body was full of peerless sharpness. The snowflakes in the air all pressed down. Gu Xingyun's body rose. The snowflakes, like a sky curtain, suddenly rotated with the surge of the air. A large vortex suddenly appeared in the snow-white sky, and a strong airflow appeared between heaven and earth. The strong wind blew over. On the ground, countless turf was rolled up, and the snowflakes condensed into ice. Endless huge ice swords almost covered Gu Xingyun's body in the rotation of countless vortexes. In midair, Gu Xingyun's angry voice sounded. Break. Boom. With Gu Xingyun as the center, a great deal of airwaves surged and spread around him. Countless ice swords were completely shattered around him. Countless pieces of ice and frost fell on the ground and then rolled back in an instant. Gu Gu Xingyun's body, which had torn the snow curtain apart, had already descended from the sky and directly rushed to the master of Samsara Palace on the ground. 10 skills of true martial arts. 3 elements final kill. It's the remnant of the Li family. Investigate. We must find out the identity of the master of Samsara Palace. Start investigating 20 years ago. I'd like to see who she is. The whole dark world was now paying attention to this battle. As the host, Xianxia state could not be indifferent to this battle even if it knew that it was a trap. Especially a few days ago when the master of Samsara Palace clearly showed that this battle needed both sides to go all out, the whole Xianxia state paid close attention to the ongoing battle. Samsara Palace and Kunlun City rarely interacted before, so few people knew the Samsara Palace's attitude toward Samsara City. This battle appointment was somewhat inexplicable in advance. It could be said that Li Tianlan was targeted in the Sky Academy. After Gu Changjiang was killed, the letter of challenge from the Samsara Palace had reached Kunlun City. The master of Samsara Palace's attitude toward Gu Xingyun was not peaceful. Everyone could see the resentment between them, but they did not know what it was. Now it seemed that all the answers to the riddle were in front of them. 24 moves of sword. The 5th blade flying snow. Was she from the Li family? Everyone's eyes were a little dazed. In the monitoring room of the Sky Academy, looking at the picture on the big screen, Gu Fengbo, the deputy governor of Samsara City, was undoubtedly the most excited. He spoke without thinking and even directly used the word remnant. Governor Gu, please pay attention to your words. For hundreds of years, the Li family has been the god of war and hero of our Xianxia state. Although Li Kuangtu committed treason, Senior Li is still alive, and in order to make up for his mistakes, Senior Li has imprisoned himself at the border for many years. Remnant? Is Senior Li also a remnant? At the forefront of the screen, Marshal Yi Dongxing, a member of the Xianxia State Decision-Making Committee, the Deputy Minister of Army Headquarters, and known as the God of Army, glanced at Gu Fengbo coldly and said in an extremely dangerous tone. Of course I don't mean that. No one could deny Senior Li's achievements, but Gu Fengbo, the governor of Samsara City, repeated it several times. Finally he snorted and said simply, I think there's something wrong with her. We must find out. Of course they must find out. No one knew how flustered Gu Fengbo was the moment he saw the 5th blade. He was like a beggar who suddenly entered a billionaire's mansion, then killed the owner, occupied the owner's property, and suddenly learned that the owner was not dead after squandering for many years. Perhaps this analogy was not appropriate, but the feeling of guilt was the same. Even Gu Fengbo himself was surprised by his fluster. Li Honghe imprisoned himself at the border, and the Li family completely fell into desolation. The whole Xianxia state seemed to be waiting for his death, waiting for the day when the Li family came to an end. But who could have thought that the Li family had another expert of the invincible realm, and established Samsara many years ago, and now it had become one of the superpowers in the whole dark world. How was this possible? Where did this damned woman come from? Gu Fengbo's mind was in a mess. Besides panic, there was only confusion. During the period when the Li family was at its peak, every member of the Li family had appeared in the intelligence of the Gu family. After the Li family fell into desolation and Li Kuangtu died in battle, the Gu family also knew the whereabouts of every member of the Li family. In this case, how could they miss the master of Samsara Palace? Moreover, some of the 12 supermasters of Samsara had appeared many years ago, which meant that Samsara had existed since then. If the master of Samsara Palace was even from the Li family, they had no reason not to know. With the old man Li Honghe's devotion to his country, even if the Li family really had a female heavenly son who was not weaker than Li Kuangtu, they would definitely file it with Xianxia state. But in the past many years, Xianxia state knew nothing about this person. In other words, according to all kinds of intelligence, the master of Samsara Palace should not have existed in the Li family in the first place. Why did she know the unique skills of the Li family? The Li family, Li Honghe 24 moves of sword, the master of Samsara Palace. Gu Fengbo's mind was in a mess, and that was what he looked like when he was really confused. And obviously, it was not only the master of Samsara Palace that he was worried about. In public, the master of Samsara Palace directly used the 24 moves of sword, the unique skill of the Li family, to fight Gu Xingyun. The deeper meaning behind it was even more extraordinary. From now on, if people regarded Samsara as the secret pawn that the Li family placed overseas, Just like the relationship between East Island and Night Spirit, the status of the entire Li family in Zhongzhou state might change dramatically. In a panic, Gu Fengbo subconsciously looked at the figure standing in front of the monitoring room. The Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou state, Wang Tianzong. The current #1 expert of Zhongzhou state was silently looking at the screen in front of him, holding his chin with his hand and also looking thoughtful. Gu Fengbo opened his mouth and was about to speak when a voice beside him sounded, with a gentle smile. Tianzong, is the master of Samsara Palace using the unique skill of Zhuan Yuantai? The fifth blade? You knew her identity before, didn't you? The voice sounded a little old, but it was full of vigor and energy. It was an old man who looked no more than 50 years old, but his weathered eyes showed that he was actually much older than he looked. At this time he was also standing in front of the screen, watching the fight between immortals on the screen. He asked with interest. Hua Xingyang, the Executive Deputy Prime Minister of the Cabinet, a member of the Decision-Making Committee of Zhongzhou State. He was one of the leaders of the academics standing in front of the stage. In a sense, in terms of official level, Deputy Prime Minister Hua Xingyang was the highest-ranking magnate among all the spectators, and also the magnate who could best represent the attitude of Zhongzhou State. I just knew it not long ago. Wang Tianzong seemed to be thinking about something and his tone was a little slow. At the moment when it snowed in June, the first person this Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State thought of was Li Tianlan. After this battle, combined with Samsara Qin Weibai's attitude toward Li Tianlan, all kinds of speculations were inevitable. Li Tianlan's identity seemed to be about to be exposed. Wang Tianzong didn't understand Samsara's plan. From the standpoint of him and the Wang family of Beihai, once the identity of Li Tianlan, the descendant of the Li family, was exposed, there were indeed advantages and disadvantages. When he realized this, his mind had basically shifted from this battle to the next adjustment of the Wang family of Beihai and the Southeast Group. Do you know her identity? Hua Xingyang chuckled and said, back then the Li family was the pillar of Zhongzhou State. 20 years ago, although my position was not high, I also knew about the Li family. Who was this master of Samsara Palace? I've never heard of Senior Li having an adopted daughter. As one of the leaders of the academics who had the most frequent contact with Samsara, Hua Xingyang also knew the identity of the master of Samsara Palace at this time. This feeling was different from Gu Fengbo's panic. There was surprise and also a touch of joy. If the identity of the master of Samsara Palace could be confirmed, then in the future when the academics checked and balanced the Southeast Group, the Prince Group and the Special Warfare Group, they might really have a good card. Perhaps it would be like how Zhongzhou State, which held the North Korean nuclear issue, treated the former world overlord United States in the six-party talks many years ago. I don't know. Wang Tianzong shook his head slowly. He did know not long ago that the inheritance of the master of Samsara Palace came from the Li family, and he also knew a more interesting fact. The surname of the master of Samsara Palace was Gu. To be honest, Wang Tianzong wasn't even sure whether the master of Samsara Palace really had something to do with the Li family. The surname could be a coincidence, but the inheritance couldn't be faked. Recently, the Wang family of Beihai had been pretending that the master of Samsara Palace was a member of the Li family, intending to confirm her identity. But so far the news Wang Tianzong got was all chaos and uncertainty. As the closest comrade of the Li family, the Wang family of Beihai had been investigating since 20 years ago or even earlier, but they couldn't find the identity of the master of Samsara Palace, which was very thought-provoking. So he didn't hide it at this time. He also needed other groups to find some clues for him that could solve his doubts. I've seriously investigated some things, but the results are very messy. All kinds of things seem to show that the master of Samsara Palace doesn't exist. Or to be clear, at least the master of Samsara Palace didn't exist in the Li family at that time. And according to the information we got, the master of Samsara Palace is at least 40 years old, right? Hua Xingyang hesitated slightly and murmured to himself, in this case there are many possibilities. Ask Senior Li? I haven't been to the border to visit Senior Li for several years. Hua Xingyang continued to say with a smile. Wang Tianzong smiled and said nothing. Li Honghe might know something, but obviously even if he knew he wouldn't say it. The Li family had been quiet for too long in the past 20 years, so long that many people had forgotten something. It wasn't until the 24 moves of sword reappeared today after so many years that Wang Tianzong suddenly remembered. When they were still very young. Although the god of war of Xianxia state in Zhuanyuantai had outstanding combat strength, he was more famous for being good at making arrangements and setting up the overall situation. He had lived far away at the border for the past 20 years. Had he really not heard anything? Chapter 161. A 5,000-word chapter. There are 2 chapters left today. Asking for monthly votes. Attack against attack. For the entire Dark World, Zhou Xian, the god of war of Xianxia state, was also famous, but in fact he was extremely low-key and mysterious. The Sword Emperor of Xianxia state was unparalleled. The hidden god of Xianxia state stood aloof from worldly affairs. But when it came to the god of war of Xianxia state, people could only think of 4 words. Unfathomable. Compared with Li Honghe, the war god of the previous generation in Xianxia state, Zhou Xian also liked to make arrangements. However, the former's vision was extremely broad. Every chess piece on the chessboard was above board and upright, which was a real overt plot. Many of his chess pieces were also extremely obscure, but the moment the chess pieces were revealed, they revealed a kind of unstoppable strength and magnanimity. Zhou Xian focused more on conspiracies. Over the past 20 years, Xianxia state seemed to be peaceful, but undercurrents had been surging inside. The god of war of Xianxia state, the only one who was not from Zhuanyuantai in hundreds of years, guarded the special warfare system of Xianxia state, but he rarely took action. Or it could be said that he rarely took action in public. He was secretive and straightforward, and he was best at conspiring with a tiger. When he appeared in front of everyone, he always seemed to wear a conspirator's mask. He looked elegant and gentle, but in fact he was a real hero and unpredictable. In the past many years, Zhou Xian gave people the feeling of a businessman. Cooperation and trade, killing and betrayal, glory and desolation, ups and downs, right and wrong, good and evil. He rarely took action. But for many years, Kunlun City would quietly participate in every major event in the Dark World. Thunder could be heard in silence, and flowers could be seen in colorless places. In many things that seemed to develop naturally, the forces of Kunlun City, which no one would pay special attention to, suddenly became the most critical role. The god of war of Xianxia state ranked 4th on the world divine list, but most of the time he always showed people the deepest schemes and shrewdness. Zhou Xian's strength was undoubtedly extremely terrifying. However, very few people were able to see just how terrifying it was. For many years, today seemed to be the first time that Zhou Xian took action in front of people, and he did his best. This was Zhou Xian, who was extremely strange to everyone. Fierce and powerful, it seemed to carry the sharpness of the heavens and the earth. Every single move he made was filled with an unbelievably wild, offensive and oppressive feeling. Triple kill. His whole body seemed to have turned into a sharp sword, approaching the master of Samsara Palace in an instant. The strong airflow gathered around him crazily. The snow-white and cold sky was completely torn apart in an instant. The sword intent roared and condensed again, and he had already appeared in front of the master of Samsara Palace. For ultimate return to origin. The airflow surged. On the high platform, the surrounding air suddenly shook. Dust flew up, and the entire high platform suddenly exploded. Countless stones flew up for a moment, and then disappeared in an instant, directly turning into the most primitive nothingness. The battlefield instantly became blurry. Zhuanyuantai had the strongest sword. Kunlun City had the strongest domain. And the Wang family of Beihai had the strongest outbreak. There were 10 styles in the 10 skills of true martial arts, the world-shaking unique technique of Kunlun City. The 8th and 9th styles were the core domain of Kunlun City. The area within a radius of 100 meters instantly turned into a void. This was the symbol of an invincible realm expert. But when Zhou Xian's strength reached such a level, as long as he wanted, his every move could be surrounded by the void. Oh, it's wonderful. Is he desperate so soon? The high platform had completely disappeared. Under the effect of 4 moves to 1, the void continued to spread around. In an instant, it broke through the range of 100 meters and kept expanding. In the domain, the master of Samsara Palace, holding the sword with one hand, suddenly froze for a moment. Dozens of spectators had all stood up subconsciously. At the forefront of the crowd, Yi Wuji squinted and stared at the blurry scene in front of him, whispering to himself. "Teacher, the master of Samsara Palace will lose?" Feng stood beside Yi Wuji and asked in a low voice. He lowered his head to hide the indescribable passion in his eyes and subconsciously glanced around. The goddess Qin whom he had dreamed of tasting was not here. At such an important moment he did not know what she was planning behind the scenes. In recent years, this seemed to be the mode that Samsara was best at. The palace master with matchless combat strength was in charge of fighting, and Qin Weibai was in charge of operation. On such an important occasion she did not show up, which had already aroused everyone's vigilance and uneasiness. But for Feng there was only regret. The first beauty of Zhongzhou state. He really did not know what kind of peerless beauty she was. Lose. Yiwuji did not look at the proudest student beside him. He shook his head and said in a complicated tone with strong surprise and fear, "Maybe you don't know the meaning of the sword stroke of the master of Samsara Palace just now. That sword stroke belongs to a set of unique skills called 24 moves of sword. It was the core inheritance of the former war god family of Zhongzhou state, and also the unique skill that made them invincible in the dark world for hundreds of years." The corner of his mouth trembled. He took a deep breath and said slowly, "That is the strongest sword intent. The true meaning is to break everything." Everything? Feng was a little confused. Everything. Tianhai Wuji looked serious. Including the void of the invincible realm. Feng opened his mouth, but before he could continue to ask, in the blurry air, the blazing sword light filled the whole field in the blink of an eye. On the training ground where the coldness had not yet dissipated, the heat wave hit people. In the domain that should not have any matter, a flame burst out completely as if burning the void. The seventh swordsman summer solstice. Behind Gu Xingyun the broken ice chips began to burn in an instant. The sword intent changed to extreme, and the orange flame swept the battlefield. In the blink of an eye, the snowy sky curtain torn by Gu Xingyun disappeared. Suddenly, a torrent of several hundred meters long appeared between heaven and earth, traversing the heavens. The torrent surged violently just like boiling magma. The master of Samsara Palace waved her sword. A large amount of magma flowed in the air like a long river. From top to bottom, it went straight into the domain that Gu Xingyun had spread out for hundreds of meters. The twisted and blurry domain began to expand directly, and the magma flowed wantonly with the sword light. The master of Samsara Palace and Gu Xingyun rushed together. The sword light that seemed to be about to fly out of the whole world became brighter and brighter. Their bodies seemed to have completely disappeared. The domain full of sword light and magma kept shrinking and expanding. Several invincible realm superiors who were watching the battle opened their domains almost at the same time. The next moment the sky fell and the earth cracked. The domain of nothingness exploded like a real thing. The surging magma set off huge waves that were tens of meters high. The scorching temperature rose and spread. The magma was endless and suddenly it covered the whole area of hundreds of meters around. The green grass was completely submerged and the whole training ground shook violently. In the core of the battlefield the sound of weapons colliding kept rising. The invincible sword light kept flying and there were more and more of them. Under the sword light there was a sea of fire. At this moment Feng could clearly see that not far from him, the domain of an invincible realm expert shook for a moment in the impact of the magma. A thunder-shocking realm expert standing not far from him suddenly opened his eyes wide. Before he could even make a sound, a torrent had rushed past him. The lava, mixed with the extremely sharp sword intent, rushed over. The thunder-shocking realm expert had completely disappeared. There was a slight flash of lightning in the magma, which seemed to be the only trace of the existence of the thunder-shocking realm expert. This was... Feng's heart skipped a beat. "Chaos, what do you mean?" Beside the invincible realm expert whose domain was unstable, a strong white man in his 50s suddenly stood up and roared angrily. The man's momentum was extremely amazing. Even in the battle of the invincible realm he was very elegant when he was angry. "We are allies here. You deliberately loosened the domain just now and made me lose a precious subordinate." Chaos. The commander of Knights Templars in Northern Europe. Although he was not an expert on the divine list, Knights Templars was backed by the Vatican, the largest religious organization in the world. With such a backer, Knights Templars could be said to be really domineering in Northern Europe. Chaos's behavior was extremely high profile, and he regarded himself as the chosen one of God. In Northern Europe and even in the whole Dark World he was famous for being domineering. Hearing the questioning from the so-called allies nearby, Chaos was expressionless. He stared at the whole audience with a serious look in his eyes, twitched the corner of his mouth casually and said disdainfully, Allies? No, no, no. How can the heretics of the Dark Knights be qualified to be with the people of God? You should be purified by the flame. It was indeed the Dark Knights. Feng's mind was running wild. The Dark World in the area of Northern Europe could be said to be a real separatist regime. It was the place where the major dark forces occupied all year round and even the battlefield. The headquarters of the two largest knight groups in Europe, Knights Templars and Dark Knights, were located in Northern Europe. These two could be said to be real enemies and they fought all year round. Because of the fight between the two there were a lot of interests and variables. Northern Europe could now be said to be a relatively strong place where the major dark forces had penetrated. Heretics. Holiness and darkness. Feng's mind was spinning, but his body was suddenly pulled back by someone. At the same time he also noticed that the superior of the half-step invincible realm in the Dark Knights changed his face dramatically, and he roared to retreat. In the case that chaos of the Knights Templars intended to kill them, being a little closer to the battle between Zhou Xian and the Master of Samsara Palace was equivalent to suicide. This kind of figure, which was equivalent to the god of the mortal world, could easily pose a great threat to the superior of the thunder-shocking realm, even if it was unintentional, or even if it was the aftermath of the battle. Feng looked back subconsciously. In his blurred vision, the Master of Samsara Palace was still holding the ice sword, but the flame that was getting hotter and hotter suddenly began to spread. Zhou Xian was surrounded by lightning, and the lightning condensed into thousands of rays of light that were as long as 100 meters around him, rotating around him like lasers. Dark clouds appeared in the sky again. In the sound of thunder the lightning fell. The lightning around Zhou Xian became brighter and brighter, connected with the lightning like the god of thunder. The dense flashing light kept dancing in the air, and the body of the Master of Samsara Palace had already flown up and spun. The eighth blade, burning sky. This was the power of the eighth blade which belonged to the invincible realm, and the sword intent of the god's domain. The spreading sea of magma and fire shrank in an instant, and countless magma gathered toward the Master of Samsara Palace more and more. Thunder and lightning rose in the sky. A strong gust of wind suddenly arrived. It was windy. It was not a strong wind but a fiercely rotating tornado. Fire tornado. The fierce wind mixed with sword intent drove a large amount of magma to rise like a dragon. The sword intent turned again. The magma that gathered together turned with the whistling wind. The wind and fire expanded in the air like the power of heaven and earth. The fire tornado spun rapidly and rushed to Zhou Xian. Wherever it passed there was no grass, only a sea of fire. Dense, continuous, crazy. Fighting. Fighting all the time. The moment the two sides came into contact, the battle did not stop at all. All kinds of unique skills were mixed with ruthless attacks and everyone watching was dumbfounded. Are they really going to fight to the death? The lightning and the magma collided and surged. In the battlefield within a radius of hundreds of meters, there were gorgeous and fatal colors like fireworks everywhere. Zhou Xian looked calm and rushed directly to the fire tornado in front of him. Countless rotating lightning around him gathered into a huge shield in front of him. Breaking through the waves of fire. Breaking through the hurricane. Zhou Xian's body shook violently. Countless lightning around him instantly left his body. A large number of light rays, like meteors, rushed to the Master of Samsara Palace without reservation. The 8th Supreme Sword Move. The 7 unique flowing lights. Sparks and lightning exploded in the air one after another. The entire number 1 training ground had become a real death zone. The fire and lightning fell on the ground, and the raging fire burned on the ground that had been blasted by the lightning. All the spectators had retreated to the outside of the number 1 training ground, watching the world-shaking battle with a solemn look. Zhou Xian was moving forward. His steps were getting bigger and faster. Running, sprinting. Countless lightning and sparks exploded around him. In the doomsday-like scene he was like a demon shuttling in the end of the world, moving forward with indomitable will and looking down on everything. Take off. With the rotating sword light, the Master of Samsara Palace fell. Zhou Xian's body rose from the ground and instantly passed over the head of the Master of Samsara Palace. His legs gathered strength in the air. Zhou Xian's face was cold. His body fell and he stepped directly on the head of the Master of Samsara Palace. Domain. A domain that was countless times stronger than before appeared directly. 9th Secluded Impasse. The bright sky completely faded in an instant. A thick darkness suddenly fell. The fire went out, the lightning disappeared, and the air was broken. Everything around seemed to return to the most primitive state. Darkness. In the void. There was nothing. In the darkness, the master of Samsara Palace suddenly raised her head. Without any hesitation. The 15th blade. Samsara. The sword light hidden in the darkness lit up. A sword stabbed straight. The shattering of land. The 19th blade. The whole world seemed to be broken in an instant. In the messy and extremely violent sword intent, there were only illusions left. A figure that was very strange to everyone suddenly appeared in everyone's sight. It seemed real and illusory, as if it was far away in the sky. He stepped forward, raised his sword and stabbed straight. This was a vague but clear shadow. His movement was extremely slow, but it had a kind of strength and aggressiveness that could break heaven and earth. In the scene that seemed real and illusory, he raised the sword edge. This was an extremely quiet sword, but also an extremely violent sword. The endless void was full of gods and demons and all living beings in the world. With the thrust of the sword, everything vanished into thin air under the sword. What was invincibility? What was the peak? This sword was the real invincibility in peak. Who is this? Everyone, including Gu Xingyun, subconsciously had a question. In the monitoring room, Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State Wang Tianzong, who had seen this scene and even the shadow, had narrowed his eyes tightly. This sword again. This shadow again. He had seen it on Mount Dibbing, but that sword had not been used. Now he saw it again. This sword tore apart the domain of the 9th secluded impasse of Kunlun City in an instant. In front of the sword intent that almost shattered heaven and earth, even as the Sword Emperor, he felt suffocated for a moment. The 15th blade. Samsara. Who was the master of Samsara Palace? Whose sword intent did she reincarnate into? This was a question that Wang Tianzong was very interested in. After seeing that sword for the first time, he had secretly studied the information of the war gods of Zhuanyuantai. He could basically be sure that the sword intent of the master of Samsara Palace did not match any war god of Zhuanyuantai of Kunlun City at all. But the sword intent of Samsara was not fictitious. This sword could be used, which proved that this person did exist. Who was she? Who was she reincarnated? For a moment, Wang Tianzong even wanted to try this sword that made him suffocated and excited. The cold sword edge stabbed straight up. Gu Xingyun, whose expression changed dramatically, suddenly rose. The domain formed by the 9th secluded impasse was completely torn apart in an instant. The darkness collapsed and was condensed by the sword intent. A black tide that seemed to tear the heaven and earth suddenly appeared on the battlefield. It went straight up and fiercely hit everything above it. Gu Xingyun's body rose nearly 10 meters. His eyes narrowed tightly and his face was unprecedentedly cold and hard. The black tide rose straight up. Gu Xingyun reached out his hands, made a gesture of holding hands, and suddenly smashed down. Boom! An explosive roar resounded through the whole field. A purer and almost perfect dark domain suddenly appeared. A full blow. The dark domain was compatible with the black tide. The most perfect domain fell straight down. This was the strongest blow. 10 skills of true martial arts. 10th unique domain. A cruel smile flashed across Gu Xingyun's mouth. Before the smile disappeared, his expression had changed dramatically. It was as if he had seen a ghost in broad daylight. It was absurd, shocking, incredible, and unbelievable. He suddenly opened his eyes wide. In addition to shock, there was only pure terror left in his eyes. The 10th unique domain below, which was far more perfect and powerful than the 9th secluded impasse, disappeared instantly. It didn't break but disappeared inexplicably. The darkness disappeared without a trace and the sun shrouded the earth. Only the sword was still rising. The shattering of land. At the moment when light and darkness alternated, a loud noise suddenly rang out on the battlefield, mixed with Gu Xingyun's voice full of fear. 10th unique domain. Who the hell are you? 10th unique domain. This was the only reason. This woman, who had the core inheritance of the Li family, had been forbearing from the beginning until the last moment. When Gu Xingyun used the 10th unique domain, this damn woman actually used the 10th unique domain in the sword intent of the shattering of land. The real 10th unique domain. The same unique technique was perfectly offset. But how the F***ck was this possible? The loud noise spread. The violent smoke mixed with the ashes of the fire spread like ripples on the ground, and countless blood sprinkled in the smoke. In the midst of the chaos, the master of Samsara Palace stood there quietly. But Gu Xingyun, the god of war of Zhongzhou state, had disappeared from the battlefield. The warm sun shone brightly, and the sound of the surging river and sea came from afar. Everything was soft and beautiful. The entire scene was dead silent. The master of Samsara Palace stood there quietly. After a long time her body moved slightly. Through the black veil under the cloak she looked up at the sky in her sight. Her eyes were complicated with regret, but more than that there was a kind of attachment from the soul. The past was ethereal and the present was stable. She glanced at the crowd watching the ceremony in the distance, turned around and left silently. The soft wind blew away her whisper and she was in a trance.